Chapter 119. His master had told him to act like it, so the ogre chief left his clan and left the Emerald Palace with only 50 warriors. Like the patrolling bats, he began to walk out. He had a name, Duoga, given by the green dragon. Although they had 3 heads, the ogres were still low-level creatures. They weren't like the 9-headed lizards, which had independent thoughts in each head. Their heads were only there to ensure that they could continue fighting after one of their heads was chopped off. Therefore, ogres only had one thought, and their intelligence was not high. It was the same for Duoga. The long night made the rainforest dark and damp. This made Duoga very uncomfortable. To be honest, the ogre chief was quite happy when the enemies attacked. At least they brought fire. Fires were not allowed in the Green Capital, so Duoga had to listen to his master. The ogre chief had only taken a few steps when he felt a slight chill. This made him realize that he was being watched. He was not far from the Emerald Palace. Who knew how the enemies had discovered him so quickly? However, the ogre chief continued to walk forward. He did not care. Instead, he was filled with excitement and eagerness. Come, let's give Duoga another dinner. However, the expected attack did not appear. Duoga realized that the feeling of being watched, which gave him goosebumps, quickly disappeared after a while. The enemy had retreated. Damn it, cowards! Duoga's 3 heads opened their mouths at the same time and cursed. He was afraid that the enemy would be scared away and would not attack again. If that happened, tonight's mission would be ruined and his dinner would be gone. Chief, it looks like the enemy is too weak. Once we fight, we can quickly crush their camp. The ogre next to Duoga said. He was a weak little fellow with only 1 head. His face was ashen, and his hands were wet and limp. His attitude was extremely flattering. He even added, just like how you crushed the human camp. We all know. We all know. The other ogres agreed. I don't know. I only care about my dinner. Duoga turned his head and said in a low, muffled voice, also, don't talk like those annoying thorn beasts. Before he could finish, he suddenly felt that the air around him was not right. He raised the mace in his hand and swung it in the direction of his intuition. Poo-pee-you. The sound of 2 weapons piercing into flesh rang out almost at the same time. Duoga's mace smashed into the chest of a battle lizard man who had hidden himself. That area was now completely caved in, and the ambusher was instantly killed. At the same time, the flattering ogre from before had its head cut off by the ghostly short blade. It only had 1 head, so it died instantly. The chieftain didn't care about his dead comrade. Instead, he took 2 steps forward and grabbed the corpse of the sneak attacker with 1 hand. The size of a battle lizard man was no different from a small pony to an ogre. Duoga tore the lizard man in half with both hands, then bit off all 3 heads at the same time. Only then did he call out in a muffled voice, "Food!" Their food had arrived. After the first person died, the ogres quickly reacted. Most of the followers Duoga had brought with him this time were 2-headed ogres, all of them elites of the tribe. They immediately began their counterattack. If Caesar was here, he would be able to determine the combat ability of these ogres, but now that the black dragon was not here, the tribe could only use other methods to deduce. After being discovered, the 5 battle lizard men were no match for a 2-headed ogre in a head-on battle, let alone a 3-headed ogre. This kind of loss was not worth it, so the battle lizard men quickly retreated, emitting an unpleasant stench as they ran away. Chase! Duoga roared, but he immediately swallowed the words back into his stomach. He could only endure the dizziness caused by the stench and chased with large strides. When he left the area, he shouted, "Carry out the master's mission." Unfortunately, the battle lizard men ran away very quickly, and they had the ability to hide themselves. At this time, they were already far away. Useless weaklings, the ogre chieftain growled, persistently chasing after them. At this moment, the low howls of wolves suddenly sounded in the rainforest. Accompanied by the rustling of the forest, Pairs of red eyes appeared in front of Duoga. Green-skinned orcs. The ogres became alert and moved closer to each other. There was nothing to say. The orcs were not a race that was willing to waste time talking, and the ogres were the same. Thus, when the two sides met, the ogres immediately raised their maces and flail, while the orcs urged their mounts to leap forward and attack at the same time. When the target orcs reached the predetermined distance, Duoga suddenly stepped forward, raised his maces with one hand, and smashed them down on the head of the Mount Wolf. The enormous Mount Wolf from the Underdark, known to have an iron skull and bronze bones, had its head smashed open at this moment. When it died, it turned into a headless corpse, its blood splattering all over the ogres. In order not to follow in the footsteps of the Mount Wolf, the orcs could only temporarily abandon their dead mounts and roll to the side to open up the distance, then get up and regroup. More and more orcs rushed in. However, even the powerful orcs were no match for the two-headed ogre in a one-on-one or even two-on-one. Even the leader Gaul was gradually being suppressed by the ogre chieftain. Unfortunately, this wasn't a fair fight to begin with. Whoosh whoosh. As the air crackled, a few ogres were pierced through by thorns. An ugly figure appeared in the distance. The shadow chimera lion flapped its wings, pressuring the ogre chieftain from a distance. The battle lizardmen in charge of keeping watch had immediately notified the army after discovering this unusual ogre. Thus, this was a joint operation of many clans. Damn it! If Duoga had not realized the problem by now, he would not be stupid, but retarded. Fortunately, the ogre chieftain was not that stupid. This was a trap, and he had been set up. Kicking away Gaul, Duoga retreated with the ogres and roared, "Let's go, break out of the encirclement." The ogres did not have the habit of fighting to the death. However, as if deliberately not letting him do as he wished, shadows appeared on the path that Duoga had to take to retreat. The Jackalon and Grey Centaur blocked his path. Hog was here too. "Useless weaklings, Duoga will crush you all." The ogre chieftain roared angrily. Anger brought impulsiveness and power. He began to lead the ogres to break out of the encirclement. But he could not. Gaul, Hog, Manticore, Grey Centaur, and the other leaders were not weak. Although the ogre chieftain was stronger than any one of them, breaking out of the encirclement was a pipe dream when they worked together. Soon, one of Duoga's arms was torn off by the Jackalon, and one of his heads was also slashed. But this guy was really a bit of a monster. Even under such circumstances, Duoga still managed to injure the Jackalon leader, leaving a large wound on Hog's abdomen. But that was the end of it, because at this time, the leader of the demon hounds had also arrived. As the strongest leader of the Black Dragon army, the ogre chieftain's combat ability was not much stronger than Nero's even at his peak. Thus, when the demon hounds arrived, the encirclement ended. Soon, the ogre chieftain's arms were torn off, and 2 of his 3 heads were twisted off. He had completely lost the ability to fight. Even so, this big guy was still thinking of ways to continue attacking. He endured the pain and pounced forward, opening his mouth to tear Hog apart. Duoga's strategy was to suppress Hog and cripple the Jackalon while surrounded by enemies. This was a principle that ogres had learned in group fights when they were young. However, the other side's leaders were numerous and powerful, so Duoga did not succeed. Since he had failed to succeed, the ogre chieftain, who had lost his fighting ability, was even less of a threat. Hog only needed to shift to the side to avoid the bite, and then his short heavy axe slashed into the ogre's abdomen, causing its large body to fall heavily to the ground. The ogre chieftain was still growling on the ground. His arms were gone, and his abdomen was heavily injured. Blood flowed freely, and only one of his heads was still alive. However, he did not beg for mercy or surrender. "Master," Duoga growled. Right now, he only wanted to send a message to Sylvia. The enemy's forces were not weak. In fact, they were very strong. They had been careless. "Master? Indeed, you will be the best spoil of war I can offer to Master." The demon hounds walked over and placed their thick front claws on the ogre chieftain's last head, then crushed it. Chapter 120. Dong, dong, dong. The drumming annoyed her. From the clan camp at the bottom of the Emerald Palace, the cries of the thorn beasts, the cries of the twin-legged flying dragons, and the trembling of the blood bats could be heard at the same time. However, the most annoying thing was the furious howls of the ogres. The chaotic noise echoed in the Emerald Palace, causing Sylvia to frown. Were these bastards pigs? No lord could stand such a terrible clamor. I want to make these fellows swallow cow dung one by one. Sylvia thought angrily and summoned the wyverns. Master! As a high-level dragon descendant, the wyverns were the only creatures allowed to enter the Crystal Palace. Other than that, the other dependents were all rejected. The green dragon hated those sloppy fellows dirtying her palace. Even the most powerful ogre chieftain couldn't enter. Sylvia would usually only meet him in the treetop fortress. The wyverns were Sylvia's personal guards, and also her mouthpiece. What's going on? You and those fellows below. Are you tired of living and want to rebel against me? Sylvia asked angrily, her long and narrow eyebrows raised. Don't be fooled by her voluptuous, elegant, and dignified appearance of a noble lady. Every chromatic dragon's rule was extremely bloody and cruel. The green dragon was no exception. When she wasn't happy, she would easily skin and hang some of her dependents. We have no intention of awakening the mother of poison's anger, master. The wyverns stared at their reflections on the ground and smacked their lips. They weren't too nervous or afraid. After all, they had been by her side for so long and already understood her temperament. But there is indeed bad news coming from below. I hope the thing you brought can save you from torture. The mother of poison stared at them fiercely. The ogre chieftain is dead. The twin-legged flying dragon's words were straightforward. After hearing this, Sylvia's expression calmed down. She raised her eyebrows, but no emotion could be seen on her face. She wasn't in a hurry to deny it. Instead, she shifted her gaze away from the wyverns and slowly stood up from the throne, walking to the side. Tracking. The name was vulgar, but the effect was extraordinary. This was the most basic effects spell, and it was also one of the 3 precious techniques. Its application was extremely broad, and any spellcaster had to master it. Soon, Sylvia knew the result. I got it. Leave now and order those guys to keep quiet. Sylvia still maintained that noncommittal expression as she waved her hand to dismiss the wyverns. Her tone was flat, but the slight trembling in her dark green pupils showed that her heart wasn't completely unperturbed. Duojier had died just like that. Although the news of the ogre chieftain's death did not enrage the green dragon immediately. No matter how hot-tempered the Pentachet dragons were, they would learn to control their temper in old age. However, he was after all her most capable dependent, and Sylvia was somewhat distressed. She did feel sorry for him. Duoga had contributed a lot to her. All right, little black bastard, you really want to start a war with me? Sylvia muttered to herself, minding her own business as she walked into the depths of the palace. She chanted an incantation and opened her treasure vault, which she regarded as priceless, and dug out a magic item that had been sealed for a long time. This was a treasure that was close to the legendary level. It originated from the Green Dragon's harvest after defeating the Northern Allied army. Even in the vast collection of items in her treasure vault, this item's value was one of the highest. Magic item, Staff of Void. Sylvia scrutinized her treasure, her eyes shining with an infatuated light. Other than being able to increase spellcasting ability, this staff had a powerful additional attribute, and that was also the reason why it was comparable to a legendary item. Through its enhancement, the spells cast by the user would be able to penetrate the resistance of elemental resistance to a certain extent. Although its effect was powerful, this magic item's current applicability was worrying. After all, in Iradia's territory, it was difficult to find a creature with strong elemental resistance. Without an opponent, the existence of the Staff of Void had lost its meaning, and its glory had been covered in dust for a long time. But now it could be put to great use. Sylvia deactivated the transformation spell and revealed her true form. Then, she opened her mouth and stuffed the magic item called the Staff of Void into her throat bit by bit, and swallowed it into her stomach. Unlike humans who could use it immediately, for a true dragon, it was actually quite troublesome to borrow the power of a magic item. They needed to swallow the magic item that they wanted to use into their stomach. Then, the true dragon had to rely on their elemental blood to resonate with their body. After that, the power of the magic item would be attached to the true dragon's body, and it would take effect at any time. It sounded quite good. It would take effect at any time, and it would not be a hindrance. However, a true dragon could only do this with one magic item at a time. If they wanted to use another magic item, they would have to vomit out the original item from their stomach, and swallow a new magic item. This also meant that for a true dragon, even if they had endless treasures and countless magic items in their collection, they could only use one magic item at a time. As for the others, they could only stare at them. In this way, it seemed that the humanoid race had a wider range of adaptability. In Iradia, humanoid races, especially humans, were the ones who were truly favored by the gods. After stuffing the Staff of Void into her mouth, Sylvia paused for a moment. She waited for her body to resonate with the magic item, and after successfully producing a reaction, she left the treasury and used a spell to lock the treasury again. "Come, face me." After transforming into her dragon form, Sylvia's voice had become low and hoarse. "I will let you live, but I will kill all the lackeys who serve you and let you taste the taste of pain again." Era hid in the shadows of the trees and watched the monsters rush out of the camp of the Emerald Palace. He was the leader of the battle lizardmen and was responsible for the monitoring of this area. However, he did not expect to see such a scene as soon as he replaced his kin. Like a flood of wild beasts, all the sounds in the forest were drowned out by the thunderous footsteps. Twin-legged flying dragons, blood bats, and thorny beasts were screaming non-stop. One after another, they pushed each other out of the camp. The ogres, the most important army of the Green Capital, also rushed out with weapons in their hands. The spiked clubs with sharp points and heavy iron were enough to break bones and tear armor. The Green Capital army moved out in full force. Not far away, a true dragon roared. Compared to the noise of the army and the movement of the rushing river, the sound was not strong, but it made the battle lizardmen feel a layer of goosebumps on their skin. They could not help but feel their legs go soft, and they almost collapsed to the ground. "Hurry! Go!" informed the Lord. The husky turned around and wanted to give orders to the other tribes, but a wave of indiscriminate attacks descended. Huge bone spurs covered the sky like a torrential downpour. Because they were too nervous, they accidentally exposed their position and were discovered by the surging Green Capital army. They were directly beaten into sieves and lost their lives. Sylvia constructed a spell and used her powerful magic to cast the Eye of Truth. Ignoring the obstruction of the forest and river, she directly locked onto the location of one of the Black Dragon's branch forces. She already knew the location. Destroy them! A huge green dragon more than 20 meters long spread its wings and soared in the sky. The dragon's roar was endless. Chapter 121. The Black Dragon was hidden in the damp, dark underground. This place did not belong to any of the three branches, but was instead an independent underground lair located at the center of the connecting points between the various camps. This way, Caesar could guard against the Mother of Poison's sudden attacks. After receiving the Demon Hound's message, he could quickly reinforce the branch army. Every day, he would summon a clan leader, using this opportunity to understand the situation and discuss strategy. He took turns to summon each clan leader, not showing any personal preference. Whether it was a privileged clan like the Beastmen or a marginalized clan like the Grey Centaurs, they all had the opportunity to express their thoughts to Lord Black Dragon. Even the Boar Men and Ankhegs in charge of logistics had the opportunity to discuss strategy. Caesar knew that he was not smart. He needed the opinions and suggestions of these clans. Although most of them were not effective, they might provide him with some ideas and open up a new structure. At the same time, he did need to meet these commanders to understand the deployment of the various branches. Then, based on the actual situation, he would slowly adjust the distribution of forces. It was a little raw, but Caesar was working hard to learn how to be a qualified lord. Indeed, although he was much stronger, he still could not break away from the little black dragon in many aspects. There was still much to learn. However, he had to take it step by step. Ever since the operation against the Green Capital began, there had not been any large-scale battles, but small-scale battles had occurred. Every day, his clan would encounter the Green Capital's army. Perhaps the Black Dragon's subordinates would ambush the Green Capital's scouts, or perhaps the Green Capital's minions would ambush the Black Dragon's subordinates. Both sides had victories and defeats, and they fought endlessly. However, Caesar did not make a move from beginning to end, quietly observing the changes. Without seeing the Green Dragon, he would not make a move. Sylvia might know who her enemy was, but she would never guess what the Black Dragon of the past had become or how powerful he had become. This was his greatest advantage, so Caesar had to wait until the Green Dragon appeared before showing himself. Then, he would take advantage of the Green Dragon's misjudgment of his strength to crush the Green Dragon's throat. He only had one chance. The Green Dragon was not an idiotic target. She was an old dragon, an old pentashade dragon who had experienced countless battles. She had both strength and rationality. Caesar guessed that the Green Dragon would probably run away at all costs if it encountered a fatal threat. Even the silly and overconfident Red Dragon knew the principle of running away if he couldn't win, let alone the Green Dragon. Caesar had a strong physique and great strength, but he was no match for the Green Dragon, who knew how to use magic. Once the Green Dragon escaped, it would be difficult for him to catch up. There was one more thing that should not be forgotten. The old Green Dragon's energy assessment was higher than Caesar's, but he just happened to have the means to suppress the other party. Therefore, Caesar did not plan to fight back and forth with the Green Dragon. If he waited until the other party figured out his strength, he might still be suppressed. In this situation, Caesar's strategy was to fight to the end once he showed himself. He would use his command ability well and do his best to defeat the Green Dragon in one go. This was the reason why Caesar, as the Black Dragon Overlord, had never taken the lead and charged forward with an irresistible force. Moreover, in a situation where the lords of both sides did not show themselves, the Black Dragon's side already had a considerable advantage. There was no need for him to personally take action. At this stage, the monster clans, under the tactical guidance of the multi-angle harassment and hunting, were constantly reducing the control of the Green Capital, forcing the other party to give up most of their territory. After receiving the Black Dragon's instructions, these guys from the Underdark did their favorite evil things. They burned the fields dry, poisoned the wells, destroyed the mineral veins, plundered the livestock. They did everything they could. As long as something in the Green Capital fell into their hands, they would first destroy it. At the same time, these guys also caused unprecedented damage to the rainforest environment, which made the little girl's heart ache when she found out. By the time Sylvia reacted, changed her strategy, and gathered her forces to recover the lost territory, all that was left was broken walls and ruins. At that time, when the Mother of Poison found out about this, she felt her teeth ache. This result was not a small loss for her, but it was still acceptable. However, in the many years of war with the other pentashade dragons, Sylvia had never seen a true dragon do this. The true dragon's greed and stinginess were unparalleled in the world. No matter the size, they were used to treating the things in their hands as their own. They did not care if they needed it or if they could protect it, they just kept it well. Therefore, in a war between true dragons, the fixed assets that were seized by the enemy would generally be preserved very well. How could it be destroyed? That's its own thing, now it's mine. The little black cub's brain was wired differently. Sylvia clicked her tongue in wonder. Even at that time, she still regarded the black dragon as an ignorant child. Until something else happened. The clan leaders worked together and killed the ogre Duoga, then wrapped his body and brought it back to their king. This was an unexpected surprise. Caesar had seen this three-headed ogre on the ground before. The gnolls had sewn Duoga's arms and head back together. He had seen it 7 years ago. It was this guy who had led the ogres out of the void portal in the wilderness. Caesar remembered it very clearly. This guy might be the leader of the ogre tribe, and this was later confirmed by the battle lizardmen who were in charge of the surveillance mission. What kind of position did an ogre leader have in the Green Capital? After these days of fighting, Caesar understood that in the composition of Sylvia's forces, the wyverns were the personal guards, the blood bats were the scouts, the thorny beasts were the long-range troops, the cavemen were in charge of logistics, and the ogre tribe was the real main force under the Green Dragon's command. Caesar was overjoyed. He hadn't even mobilized the special operations team, the Undead Knights, but his kin had already beheaded the ogre leader and presented his corpse to him. He didn't know who was the one who had commanded the joint hunt at the last minute. Their performance was good, and they were decisive and achieved remarkable result. These little guys were quite capable. However, after a short moment of joy, Caesar quickly realized that the Green Dragon might not be able to sit still. Sylvia definitely wouldn't be indifferent to the death of an important kin. She might very well take action. If he was the Green Dragon, he would definitely use his spellcasting ability to search for a place to hide, find the enemy's camp, and then launch a bloody revenge. Magic was troublesome in the end, and belonged to the category of unreasonable. Caesar guessed that the underground camp built by the Ankegs might not be able to hide from the Green Dragon's search. Thus, he changed his strategy from offense to defense. He ordered the battle lizardmen to keep a close eye on the Green Capital's movements while withdrawing a large number of troops from the underground camps and gathering them in his underground lair. He only left some bait, waiting for the Green Dragon to attack and then complete the encirclement. Of course, if the Green Dragon was lucky enough, it might directly find the underground lair. That would be just what Caesar wanted, and the two of them could fight head-on. Chapter 122. They really are hiding in the underground cave. The Green Dragon with matte emerald scales hovered in the sky. Magic light splashed as she flapped her wings. She relied on magic to float in the air and use her wings to control her body and adjust her direction. Sylvia angrily shook her head. The Eye of Truth told her that one of the little black cub's lackeys was hiding below, holed up in the narrow underground cave. They had cut down and burned all the plants in the area. They used the charred stumps and broken branches to cover the entrance of the cave, blocking the spying eyes and ears and avoiding the search of the scouts. They were like cowardly gophers. Find all the entrances. Guard them. The Green Dragon roared in the dome and then descended. No one could withstand the fury of the Great Mother of Poison. This time, she had personally led an army to encircle and annihilate them. Even that little black cub had to suffer torment after being captured. No one could escape, no one. These cowardly and incompetent lowly creatures. The two-footed flying dragon followed beside her. Looking at the ogres and thorn beasts blocking all the entrances, its voice was a bit like the cry of a crow. Master, they have been scared out of their wits by your name. They don't even have the courage to pick up their weapons and resist. Let's charge in and crush these bastards. The ogre tribe clamored. Their chief had died in battle, and their anger had drowned their tiny brains. However, Sylvia did not give the order to immediately charge into the enemy's formation. Although the green dragon was proud and confident, she was not a fool. Through the eye of truth, she could see that the narrow tunnel was full of traps. Every corner was guarded by monsters. In such a complicated environment, the advantage of numbers would be greatly weakened. Moreover, she didn't know who made this cave, but its structure was so exquisite and stable that she couldn't help but praise it. There were layers upon layers inside, and each of them was independent yet connected to each other. It wouldn't be easy to completely destroy this place. If her cavemen could do this, they would not have to hang out with pigs, dogs, horses, sheep, and cows all day long. However, in the face of such a fortification, Sylvia was not helpless. The only ones who could not do anything were the white dragon with fat brains. The white dragon cubs living in the Great Glacier were angry and anxious about the snow worms hiding in the cave. They could only use their heads to block the entrance of the cave and stick out their tongues to lick it. This became a joke among the pentashade dragons. To a spellcaster, it was easy to solve this problem, not to mention that she was a powerful and intelligent green dragon. Sylvia approached and stared at the narrow entrance for a moment. Then she opened her mouth and spat dragon breath. Clouds and mist surrounded the green dragon's mouth. In Iradia, the green dragon was ranked as one of the most poisonous creatures. The main reason was their lethal breath. In Iradia, as long as one breathed in the poisonous gas, it would quickly take effect, starting from the respiratory tract and causing the entire body to fester from the inside out. Even if the creature held their breath and refused to breathe in the gas, the poisonous gas would still seep into their pores and any other places that could be invaded. In Iradia, only energy bodies and some special silicon-based creatures could completely ignore this poisonous gas. The majestic poisonous breath surged out. It did not matter if it did not come out. She wanted to fill the underground camp with poisonous gas and let those inferior species die in pain and torture. They will scratch their faces, the green dragon thought viciously. Soon, endless howls rang out from the underground cave. The sound was like a dog's bark, but also a little like a wolf's howl. It was very penetrating and extremely ear-piercing. One could probably hear it clearly even from miles away. Sylvia originally hated this kind of noise, but this time she smiled. She turned her head and smiled at the wyvern leader beside her. Listen, these painful cries and howls of despair. How pleasant! They should feel honored and thank you for your favor. They have the honor of singing songs for the great mother of poisons. The wyvern leader complimented. Sylvia did not reply. She continued to stare at the entrance of the tunnel, but her chin was nodding lightly. She was clearly enjoying the compliments and was very satisfied with them. It was worth mentioning that these black dragon lackeys had shockingly strong vitality. They could actually hold out for so long under the poisonous breath of the mother of poisons. Who knew where that black cub had found these fellows? However, they all died one after another in the end. Sylvia's eye of truth could no longer see any signs of life below. Let's go. The green dragon looked away, no longer paying attention to the entrance. He gently flapped his wings. I want to crush these underground caves one by one. At the same time, a light breeze blew past. The sky seemed to darken all of a sudden. Large dark clouds surged on the other side, and then came roaring like a tide. At the same time, there was a faint rumbling of thunder in the distance. But how could the thunder come from the ground? Alert! The green dragon sensed the abnormality and ordered her troops in a low voice. There was no need for her command. The wyverns flapped their wings and took to the air. The sanguine bats scattered in all directions, the thorn beasts retreated to the back of the formation, and the ogre tribes moved forward with their weapons in the direction of the sound. The gentle breeze turned into a hurricane. That wasn't the sound of thunder, but the sound of rolling thunder. Countless troops appeared on the horizon. They were shuttling through the forest, tearing apart vegetation and collapsing rock. They were rapidly approaching the green capital core amidst a continuous stream of roars. The demonkin dogs were at the forefront of the vanguard. They were the fastest and most agile hunters, but they were also the fiercest monsters of slaughter. They bared their fangs and charged out amidst the forest. Following closely behind were the gray centaurs and orcs. Their speed was very fast, but unlike the gray centaurs, the orcs who had wolves as their mounts had become fully armed heavy cavalry. As they moved, their armor and weapons clashed with each other, making a dull sound. They were very aggressive. Behind them were the endless horde of gnolls, shadow manticores, and battle lizardmen. What gave you the courage to bare your fangs at a great true dragon? Sylvia's eyes narrowed. She raised her neck and let out a sharp dragon's roar that pierced the eardrums of every creature. The surging dragon aura that belonged only to the old green dragon rose and spread out in all directions. In Iradia, in theory, an army with thousands of men and horses did indeed have the ability to easily kill an old dragon or even an ancient dragon. However, the prerequisite was that they could resolve the issue of dragon aura. Otherwise, who knew if even half of the so-called thousands of men and horses would be able to reach the true dragon? The green dragon slowly floated into the air, narrowing her eyes as she looked down at the charging monsters. Needless to say, just the vast dragon aura rising from her body was enough to suppress most of the weak gnolls and lizardmen until their legs turned to jelly. They didn't even dare to move. They couldn't even move a single step. Sylvia sneered at this scene. She couldn't understand how the enemy planned to fight against her green capital core under the might of the old true dragon. Roar! It was at this moment that a deep dragon's roar rang out and flames ignited on the horizon. Chapter 123. I was once trapped underground, but now I've broken free of my chains. It was a pitch-black shadow that flashed with a metallic luster. Like a volcanic eruption, it shot out from behind the group of monsters and cut through the dark clouds on the other side of the sky. It swept past the figure that was running wildly below at an extremely fast speed and was rapidly magnified in their field of vision. The first thing that came into view were the enormous wings that could not be ignored. Its wings were larger and wider than the old green dragon's. Although they were thin, they were densely covered with tumor-like joints and crisscrossing bone. They were rugged and protruding for support, full of a ferocious aura. As the distance quickly shortened, Sylvia was able to catch a glimpse of its full appearance. It was a ferocious true dragon that was completely different from the pentashade dragons and the metal dragons. It had a stronger and more muscular body than the red dragon, a more attractive head and chin than the blue dragon, sharper teeth than the green dragon, and harder and shinier scales than the black dragon. The most distinctive feature was its thick and strong neck, which made Sylvia's gaze pause for a moment. In the true dragon's aesthetic when choosing a mate, the focus was on the other party's fangs, neck, and scales. Among them, the shiny scales were the main attraction, which was a symbol of wealth. The slender neck was second, which could enhance the emotional experience during mating. The thick and long fangs were the last, which represented strength. However, although the other party had a thick neck that was the opposite of the dragon's aesthetic, the green dragon did not think that it was ugly. Its neck also had a different kind of beauty. There was no doubt about that. Was this still the little black dragon that had escaped? After 7 years, not only did the little black cub's appearance change, but its body also grew to 16 meters, which was similar to its mother's. It was also stronger, which was a visual impact. If it were not for the 4 unique horns that pointed outwards, which overlapped with the appearance of the little black dragon in her memory, Sylvia would have suspected that she had mistaken her opponent. Of course, even if its appearance was so different, it did not change the fact that it was a true dragon. What was a dragon? Dragons were majestic, powerful, proud, and glorious. This black dragon could not only satisfy the praises of the true dragons, it could also satisfy all the fantasies people had about dragons. It was simply the model of aesthetics among dragons. Sylvia was tempted. Logically speaking, it was very difficult for female dragons to be tempted by males younger than themselves, but she was. Sylvia remembered that the last time she was tempted and aroused was when she was in the prime of her life, when she looked up at an extremely old red dragon that was more than 35 meters long. Of course, the red dragon finally got his wish and raped her, and they stayed together for nearly 3 months. Sylvia didn't even blink as she stared at the majestic black dragon. Caesar also stared at her. After receiving the message from the demon hound's sharp howl, Caesar immediately knew that the green dragon had appeared. Without stopping to rest, he gathered his dependents and rushed to the battlefield, finally intercepting the enemy before it could leave. However, it seemed that the green dragon and her green capital army had no intention of retreating. Instead, they were prepared to take on this battle. This was also good. He might as well be straightforward and push forward. So this time, Caesar did not plan any strategy, nor did he explain the rules of the battle. He directly had his dependents enter the battlefield and fight the enemy head-on. He wanted to deal with the green dragon, and the underground clan wanted to deal with the green capital army. They were united in their efforts to find their opponent. The black dragon swept over the monsters' heads with majestic wind pressure and sonic booms. His dimensional suppression was beginning to show its prowess, and it was already able to counteract Sylvia's ferocious dragon aura. His figure was also able to inspire the army's dependents to regain their courage. "Tear them to shreds!" A thunderous voice echoed in the sky above the clan. "For Lord Black Dragon! Iradia is ours!" The roars of the monsters, accompanied by the sound of an earthquake and the clashing of armors, swords, and axes, formed an immortal battle song. They dragged a vast curtain of smoke behind them, and in the blink of an eye, they were already in front of them. The ogres bent their backs, the thorn beasts arched their backs, the wyverns bared their claws, and the green capital army also prepared to receive a baptism of flesh and blood. One side dared to attack, and the other side dared to receive. Thus, the battle erupted. The green capital army, as the defending side, had the initiative in this battle. They had enough time to react. Facing the surging underground clan, the thorn beasts arched their backs, and the thick bone plates that stretched from their heads to their tails opened. Sharp and powerful bone spears shot out. They killed their enemies as if they were shooting targets. The rain of bone spears covered the sky and covered the earth. Before the underground clan could get close, they had already suffered huge losses. Countless grey-hound demon centaurs and beastmen were pierced through and fell to the ground. The injured might not have died, but they would be trampled into mud by the surging monsters behind them. And as the attacking side, the underground clan was not completely at a disadvantage. The vanguard of the Black Dragon army was the grey-hound demon centaurs and beastmen. Their position in the army was roughly equivalent to that of a human charging cavalry. Running such a long distance would constantly increase their kinetic energy. Once they reached the border, the damage they would cause to the green capital army was immeasurable. As long as there was no magic protection, the underground clan would be able to shatter the green capital army's defensive line in the first moment of battle. But before they could arrive, dragon breath descended from the sky. Caesar overtook the densely packed monsters below, and was the first to charge into the enemy camp. Endless ice breath descended. His target was the green dragon Sylvia, but this did not stop him from killing as many enemies as he could on the way. The black dragon did not hesitate to spit out crystal blue ice breath, plowing through the green capital army from above. He played with the scales of war, increasing his own weight. Just as the ice condensed with a crisp sound, it was smashed apart by the devil hounds. The underground clan had arrived, tearing a hole in the green capital army's defensive line, and the endless beastmen and greyhounds were rapidly expanding this gap. Damn it! As the ruler of the green capital, Sylvia naturally could not let Caesar do as he pleased. Her wyverns could not stop the powerful black dragon, nor did she dare to. She could only act personally. Of course, she also had to act. Now was the time of war, and it was not the time to think about other things. Only when the war was over could she accomplish what she wanted with the attitude of a victor. Sylvia raised her claws. At this time, she really wanted to use plant activation. The green dragon was the chromatic dragon that understood war the most, and her innate ability could even influence the battlefield. But she could not do it now. The vegetation in this area had been cut down and burned to nothing. Casting plant activation would consume a large amount of magic power in the process of stimulating the growth of the plant. In the end, the activated soldiers would be very weak, and the gains would not make up for the losses. She could only take a step back and cast other draconic magic that she had some attainment in. Wind Blade Frenzy, draconic. Spiritual light bloomed. For an old green dragon, all spells below the legendary level were instantly cast. Sylvia only needed to gently move her magic power, and the spell model would be completed in an instant. The violent transparent blade formed in front of her, spun, and then swung out. Not only did it lock onto the black dragon, but it also attacked all enemies in front of her indiscriminately. But the black dragon did not even have the slightest reaction, as if he did not see the spinning transparent blade coming at him. He did not care and directly charged over, as if he was going to risk his life to get close to her. Sylvia smiled. She had already guessed that this would happen. The black bastard relied on his elemental resistance, and would most likely choose to take the magic attack head-on. Her movement speed was indeed not as fast as the opponent, and she was very slow in comparison, but this did not mean that he could really get close to the mother of poison. Iradia is not without something that can punish you, she thought. For this reason, before this, Sylvia deliberately swallowed the Staff of Void. Chapter 124. Indeed, Caesar did not dodge. Firstly, the forest fairy was hidden in his mouth, and could not predict or dodge the green dragon's spell. Secondly, he had magic resistance, so he did not feel the need to dodge. Rip, like the sound of metal being cut, the elemental blade cut through Caesar's black crystal scales and then sank into his flesh, leaving a wound that was neither deep nor shallow. Then came the second, the third. Caesar remained focused, but his mood became more serious. Sylvia's spell attack was unexpectedly fierce, and the damage it caused was beyond his imagination. Although Caesar's ability was abnormal enough and had an autonomous control unit that could lock in blood loss, pain, and other bodily reactions, as long as he was not cut, he could still maintain his peak combat power. However, the green dragon's spell seemed a little too powerful. The numerical display in the assessment device told him that the green dragon's ability was still between 536 and 638. Compared to 7 years ago, it had only increased by less than 10 points. However, he did not suffer such serious damage even when he took Sylvia's draconic magic head-on 7 years ago. Sylvia, she found a way to restrain my ability? Caesar came to this conclusion in his mind. To him, this was definitely not good news. Even so, Caesar restrained himself from using the spotless land. He had a clear understanding of the law ability, and after one use, it would have a cooldown period of 6 hours. This meant that he only had one chance. Caesar could use the law ability to destroy the green dragon's spell, but not now. He had to get closer. Thus, this guy took Sylvia's draconic magic head-on, ignoring the increasing injuries on his body. He did not even deviate from his flight path, as he continued to dive down, firmly locking onto the mother of poisons that was hovering at a low altitude below. So powerful! Sylvia sighed. She had already expected this, so she was not as shocked as she was when she first saw Caesar. However, the mother of poisons was still amazed by the black dragon's elemental resistance. After all, she had already resonated with the void staff and was using that magical item's penetrative ability. However, the opponent's body was still able to reduce the damage caused by magic. At the same time, she couldn't help but admire the black dragon's sturdy physique. Sylvia knew very well that true dragons were extremely sensitive to pain, which was why the sharp wind blades would bring them extreme pain. However, this black dragon didn't even blink, nor did its movements slow down in the slightest. Even the coldest and most powerful true dragon would not be so, right? Sylvia's heart was filled with drama. She stared at the rapidly approaching black dragon and cast another series of spells. Spark, Draconic, Blazing Cinder Storm, Draconic, Starfall, Draconic. I won't die immediately, right? She thought worriedly as she drained all the magic stored in her body and waited for the outcome. It was only now that Caesar knew what the old magus had faced. Incomparably powerful magic was released at the same time. The majestic energy caused the ground under Sylvia's feet to roll up. The flying five-colored spiritual light covered everything, leaving only an illusory bubble, but it became the only thing in one's field of vision. Following closely behind was the abruptly formed draconic magic. Brilliant light mixed with raging flames exploded in front of Sylvia. That was Spark. Along with it were the rampaging meteorite magic balls and elemental entities, all of which surged out at the same time. In a daze, Caesar seemed to hear the roar of magic. He reckoned that if he were to come into contact with these things, he would be able to take thousands of lives. This would be a path to hell. If he were to continue forward, he would only reach the end of all things and welcome the end of destruction. Any non-legendary level creature would think the same when faced with such a violent storm of mana, and Caesar was no exception. If he did not react, he would repeat the old magus's mistake. He was extremely confident in his body. Yes, it was not wrong to want to use the dustless land to kill, but confidence did not mean arrogance and stupidity. He knew that there was something wrong with the green dragon's body. He had experienced the damage of her magic firsthand. If he still had the power of command, this combination of attacks would probably cripple him even if he was lucky enough to survive. The power of command was strong, but if he wanted to defeat or even kill the green dragon, he would still have to rely on his own body. If he was crippled by the draconic magic and lost his ability to fight, there would be nothing to talk about in the future. Caesar's thoughts were clear. Thus, in the face of the roaring magic storm, he finally opened his mouth and chanted in a low voice. The power of command, dustless land. Ripples appeared. Compared to the overwhelming power of the green dragon's draconic magic, Caesar's power of command was like a stone sinking into a lake. There was no sound, no splash, only a ripple that gradually spreading out silently. Of course, this did not attract the attention of the Mother of Poison. In fact, her gaze had been attracted elsewhere. A troop of undead cavalry had appeared out of nowhere, stepping on blue soulfire. The sound of their hooves was like a uniform drum beat, wantonly reaping lives, and specifically targeting some of her tyrannical kin. She had to solve the problem in front of her as soon as possible. The Green Army needed her help. They were already at a disadvantage, Sylvia thought, but when she turned around, she found that her magic had completely dissipated. It did not cause any waves, as if it had never appeared. The sky in front of her was clear. Of course, there was also the black dragon who was about to reach her. Sylvia's mind was filled with doubts, but before she could think about it, she was shocked to find that her effect with the void staff was linked. It was broken. Then, something even more terrifying happened. She felt that her body was digesting the thing in her stomach. The void staff was being dissolved, as if it was not a magical item, but a stone and metal that she had casually swallowed. This was impossible. This did not make sense. What did he do to me? For the first time, Sylvia's heart was filled with a strong fear of the unknown. The other party had displayed an ability that was beyond her understanding and imagination. Should she continue to fight to find out, or just to be safe and open a portal to escape? Sylvia hesitated for 1 to 2 seconds when dealing with sudden incidents that went against the rules. She was a little hesitant. This hesitation would make her regret it for the rest of her life. It was this moment of confusion that Caesar seized the opportunity. The black dragon was already in front of her. Although he was only 16 meters tall, his exceptionally strong body was like a meteor falling from the sky, crashing into the slender body of the Green Army's leader. The Mother of Poison, who had always maintained absolute safety around her, was closed in. At the same time as the teeth-numbing collision sounded, the solid touch made Caesar let out an excited dragon roar. "Got you!" Chapter 125. The next moment the 2 true dragons descended from the sky. The green dragon's levitation spell was unable to support the black dragon's charge, and they fell straight down without any buffer. Their extremely heavy weight caused extremely high damage to the ground. Boom! This was the sound of the ground trembling and earth exploding. Even in the smoke-filled battlefield, the sound was intimidating and spread to every corner of the area. The surface of the ground that had already been peeled off by the mana storm was once again dug up, overturned, and then shattered. The sand and dust produced by the fall was like a shock wave, surging and rolling up violently, and then spreading in all directions. "Got you," Caesar thought. To him, this was a temporary victory. After painstaking effort, he finally had the chance to truly deal damage to the old green dragon. He flipped over and climbed out of the hole he created. He shook his head, shaking off the dust and dirt that covered his mouth and nose. This kind of fall was nothing to Caesar. His steel-like scales and muscles could protect his organs well, so he wouldn't suffer from any internal displacement or a concussion. The black dragon was in good condition. At this moment, Sylvia also raised her head. The true dragon's unique body structure and abnormal flexibility had greatly cushioned the impact. Moreover, the old green dragon's life force was strong enough to begin with. Although the collision had caused some confusion, it was not enough to have any substantial effect on the Mother of Poisons. Roar! However, the green dragon was still furious. Sylvia couldn't help but open her mouth and roar. She used some of her recovered mana to construct a draconic spell, ready to unleash it. As an old green dragon that had lived for more than 400 years, she had long been able to control her emotions. Under normal circumstances, Sylvia would find it difficult to fall into such a state of rage. However, this time, the Mother of Poison was beyond furious. In fact, her anger stemmed from her uneasiness, from the fear of discovering that things were out of her control. The reason for this was Caesar. This black dragon had given her too many surprises, causing her to be in a sorry state and at a loss of what to do. At this moment, the black dragon pounced on him again. Sylvia didn't know why, but she subconsciously took a step back, stunned by the opponent's ferocious aura. She spat out a mouthful of poisonous breath to block and defend herself, and then smashed her draconic magic down. Strong wind explosion, draconic. At this moment it was obvious that Sylvia's nerves were tense and she was truly panicking. This was because when facing an enemy in front of her, her first goal wasn't to defeat or kill her opponent. Instead, she wanted to open up some space and maintain a safe distance. Due to the wrong decision, the first spell she cast was not an offensive spell with great lethality, but a highly effective repelling spell. Unfortunately, the results were minimal. It was as if the black dragon had gone mad. He did not care about the ferocity of the attacks or the strength of the poison breath. He simply ignored the repelling spells and the poison breath and charged straight in. At the same time, Caesar could clearly feel that the threat of magic to him was decreasing. Sylvia's magic had plummeted to a whole new level, and was no longer at the same level as before. Opportunity. During a battle, one could not afford to be distracted, so Sylvia also maintained a high level of vigilance and focus. Seeing Caesar charging over, the green dragon turned slightly, bent its right hind leg halfway, bent its knee and twisted its waist in one smooth motion, and launched a powerful tail flick. To a green dragon, a tail flick was always more powerful than a swipe of its claws or a bite. The reason was that the muscles of the green dragon's tail were different from the other pentashade dragons. That part was relatively strong. In terms of tail strength alone, they were not weaker than some red dragons of the same stage. Moreover, at the end of their tails, there was a tumor-like, horny aggregate full of spikes. It was the same structure as Caesar's tail before it was modified. It was like a battering ram, heavy and powerful, but more agile. It was the green dragon's most powerful close-range weapon. Finally, the black dragon made a dodging action for the first time. However, Sylvia did not see how the other party dodged. It was as if the other party had just dodged and avoided the tail flick attack. Under the effects of the hormones, Caesar's strength and speed were extremely terrifying. Due to the uniqueness of a true dragon as a magical creature, even the ancient dragons and immemorial dragons of the pentashade dragon stage could not compete with Caesar in terms of speed without the support of magic. As mentioned before, this was a black dragon that was getting faster and faster. There were no more surprises. Caesar had already arrived. He lowered his head and crashed into Sylvia. The 4 towering horns on his head easily pierced through the green dragon's shiny scales like paper, leaving 4 hair-raising bloody holes. The mother of poison, a true dragon with a body length of 20 meters, was directly flipped over by the 16-meter black dragon. The powerful impact caused her to fly across the ground, leaving behind a crevice that looked like it had been plowed. "It's trying to kill me." The intense pain and the black dragon's ferocious charge made this thought flash through Sylvia's mind. Then, she confirmed it and believed it without a doubt. She reacted and immediately got up. In this situation, Sylvia did not dare to have any wishful thinking. First, she had to ensure her own safety. She used her strongest ability, even if it meant accidentally killing the other party. The green dragon raised its head and extracted a certain amount of life force. The magic storm rose again, condensed and roared. "Fierce wind, listen to my call." Her words were cut off. Caesar was faster than her. In fact, he had already caught up the moment the green dragon was flipped over. This guy pounced on the old green dragon, his tail and hind legs clamping into the green dragon's body at the same time. At the same time, his left claw grabbed the green dragon's neck and his right claw pressed down on the upper and lower jaws of the green dragon's head, causing the mother of poison's magic storm to die prematurely. The outcome was decided. The threat brought by this kind of control was fatal. Sylvia did not dare to move. She only used her tail to lightly slap the ground, a sign of submission among dragons. After a pause, she said softly, "I admit defeat. I'm yours." Dragons had a different way of speaking. Even if their mouths were closed, they could still speak clearly. Caesar had done it before. Admit defeat? Surrender? You think that because you're a female dragon, you should be treated well? After losing the war, you think that surrendering is the end of the matter? Caesar stared at her with his deep red eyes, mocking her sarcastically. At the same time, he exerted force with his front claw and pressed the mother of poison's head firmly to the ground, causing it to be unable to move. Then, the black dragon's voice turned cold. "You seem to have forgotten why I'm here. I'm taking revenge," he said to himself. No. True dragons were very sensitive creatures, not to mention an old dragon that was more than 400 years old. It knew how to read people's minds. Sylvia sharply sensed the cruelty in the black dragon's words. She screamed in shock, "You can't kill me. We're pentashade dragons. We're all citizens of Her Majesty Tiamat. We're not allowed to kill each other or fight to the death. This is the rule set by the ancient dragons. There won't be such a rule in the future," Caesar said expressionlessly. Sylvia's slender neck was as fragile as a bamboo pole in front of him. Under his powerful strength, it was instantly crushed into a pile of scrap. Blood and flesh splattered out from the black dragon's claws. At this moment, the green dragon's pupils suddenly widened to an abnormal limit. At the same time, it seemed to use all its strength to tighten its muscles and straighten its body. Then, it painfully struggled twice before it died. Chapter 126. Only then did Caesar heave a heavy sigh of relief. He knew very well that killing the true dragon Nossa Silvia Rambalaffa was not a wise move. The other party was not Ungra, nor was she a young dragon who had just reached adulthood and stayed in the Underdark. She was a true dragon who had lived in Iradia for more than 400 years. Who knew if this dragon had a mate or a relative? Killing her and ignoring the rules would mean that Caesar would face even more ferocious and powerful revenge in the future. If emotional factors aside, the best choice for the Black Dragon would be to control her. But Caesar could not do that. He was not Roy and did not have the ability to control creatures like Roy did. He still had not figured out what Roy's method was. The old green dragon's magic was beyond his imagination, and was not something that Caesar could hope to match. She was stronger than him in the first place. If not for the loss in the Dustless Land, Caesar would not have the ability to suppress such an old true dragon under normal circumstances. Surrender? Just like that? Caesar did not believe it. There was no way an old true dragon, as well as the ambitious ruler of the Green Capital, would willingly submit to him. The Mother of Poisons had only been forced to do so because of the claws on her neck. If the Mother of Poisons were allowed to recover, the situation would be completely different. Leaving her alive would cause endless trouble. Once the green dragon betrayed him, Caesar would have all his trump cards exposed, and Silvia's revenge would render him powerless. It would be fine if the forces that he had painstakingly built up were burned to the ground, but once he was caught, even if the green dragon did not kill him, she would use magic to pin him under her claws, and he would not be able to rise again for the rest of his life. This was something that Caesar could not accept. Moreover, as a green dragon, Silvia's nature was not to be taken away. This dragon wanted to eat Luna. So she had to die. This was not a decision made on the spur of the moment, but a choice made after careful consideration. There would be gold, and there would be female dragons, but not now, Caesar said to himself. He let go of the lifeless dragon corpse and turned his gaze to the battlefield. His subordinates had taken drugs, so the Green Capital army was no match for the underground clans. They were already retreating, and after the Mother of Poison fell into eternal slumber, these chaotic fellows were completely defeated. The wyverns declared their allegiance, while the blood bats and thorn beasts fled in all directions. Only the ogres were still stubbornly resisting. However, they were not doing this for the Green Capital, but for the dead chieftain Duoga. They wanted revenge. It was a pity that the ogre's path of vengeance only ended in death. They howled and fought, and then were harvested one by the undead knights. The war ended. The wild boar people, Ankhegs, and shapeshifters finally entered the area. They were responsible for cleaning up the battlefield, counting the casualties, collecting the weapons, and storing the corpses of the monsters as food. This was not something that Caesar needed to care about. The wild boar people worked in an orderly and meticulous manner. Their leader, Parful, was also very easy to deal with. Caesar did not need to worry about him. What Caesar should be thinking about now was how to deal with the dragon corpse. Can it be turned into a skeletal dragon? Caesar asked without turning his head. After the war ended, he let the Black Knight, Nigendro, and the other leaders come to his side. They looked at the huge green dragon corpse together, admiring the biggest harvest of this war. I think it should be possible. Nigendro's voice was a little hoarse. He really did not expect that the Black Dragon Lord was planning to use the same trick again and create another skeletal dragon. Among the true dragons, this should be the type with a twisted personality, right? Even an undead like him thought so. It's just that, my lord. The shadow energy in the first burial ground has been completely extracted by the previous skeletal dragon. It will take at least 200 years for it to recover naturally. As for the other two shadow pools, they were formed in the last few hundred years. They are not even half as rich as the first burial ground. The effect is worrying. I really don't recommend you do this. It was obvious that Nagendra was very afraid of being blamed. He always made a statement in advance and clearly explained the worst possible outcome. After all, turning into a skeletal dragon was the worst way to use it. It was a waste of the true dragon's corpse. Now, on top of this foundation, half of it would be wasted. This was no different from wasting God's gift. Forgive me for being presumptuous, Your Majesty. At this time, Hogg also interrupted. He had not recovered from the wound on his stomach after being chiseled by the ogre chief. He also had a few new injuries on the battlefield, but he was still full of energy. I agree with the Black Knight. I don't recommend you turn this dragon into a skeletal dragon. What do you mean? Caesar turned his gaze to the Gnoll leader. He was a bit confused. He was not worried about Hogg's loyalty. It was just that when he first turned into a calamity dragon, this guy was in favor of it. Why did he change his mind now? Could it be that even the Gnolls had a double standard now? Please allow me to remind you, Your Majesty. The green dragon is not a calamity dragon. It is a true dragon native to Iradia and grew up on this land. Hogg slightly bent his waist. When I was very young, even in a foreign country, I also heard the name Green Capital Jade. Before entering old age and winning the war with the northern countries, Sylvia's title was still Green Capital Jade, and not Mother of Poison. In Iradia, it's not that there are no stories of dragons killing each other. In fact, for those who break the rules, the true dragons don't deliberately look for offenders to punish. This is inseparable from the laziness of the chromatic dragons. Most of the time, they just happen to meet and fight. Hogg explained in a low voice. He was very smart. In fact, he had already noticed the difference between Caesar and the true dragons, but he never mentioned it to anyone. He only talked about it as it was. However, turning into a skeletal dragon has touched the bottom line of the true dragons. Your Majesty, you know, the rules and the bottom line are completely different. In the eyes of the true dragons, this is equivalent to playing with the dead. The green dragon is not like the calamity dragon that no one cares about, the news will spread easily. But in Iradia, magic can make everything visible. As long as the true dragons want to inquire about the status of the green dragon, even if it is hidden in the Underdark, Your Majesty, you will not be able to hide from those eyes. After saying that, Hogg lowered his head in silence. He had said enough. This guy, is he really a Gnoll? These words made Caesar's mind move away from the green dragon's corpse. He stared at the leader who had followed him for 7 years, just like when he first accepted the Gnoll's loyalty. Even if the Gnoll Hogg was smart and strong, it was impossible for him to obtain such knowledge. Even Caesar knew nothing about this, so how could this guy know so much? How do you know? Caesar stared at the Gnoll leader. He had long felt that this guy had a story, but he never asked or paid attention to it. But now, he couldn't help but be suspicious. This is a difficult story to tell, Your Majesty. Hogg still lowered his head. You can tell me quietly. Caesar raised his chin, indicating that the Black Knight and the Battle Lizard Man should leave for the time being. You may know that the newborn Gnoll cubs are not much different from the cubs of ordinary wargs. Hogg watched them leave, blinked his eyes, and said, Less than an hour after I was born, my parents were all killed, and I became the pet of a human noble mage, the kind of pet that was chained and locked in a cage. I heard a lot of things from the conversations between the noble and other humans. Although a long time has passed and the faces are blurred, I remember everything they said, word for word. Later, when I grew up and could stand on my feet, I was sent to the arena to fight with the Taurens, Goatmen, and even some Dragonmen. Chapter 127. Hogg did have a long story, and Caesar was also interested in listening to it. He was meticulous in some details and asked questions from time to time. Although the jackalen answered smoothly, it took him a long time to explain his background clearly. The successive victories in the Colosseum won a lot of wealth for his master, and he began to pay attention to this jackalen cub. For a long time after that, in order to show that he had been domesticated, Hogg was like a dog, a real dog, a domestic dog. He even imitated the habits and was very obedient. Even if his master asked him to harm himself, Hogg did not hesitate. Moreover, this guy actually knew how to speak, but he never opened his mouth. He acted like a degenerate stupid beast, only knowing how to bark, howl, and wag his tail stupidly. In order to show off his beast-taming skills, his master took off Hogg's collar in public more than once, but this jackalen was very smart. A short period of freedom was not enough to expose him. Even if the chain was taken off, he was very obedient. Hogg maintained the image of a loyal dog for 6 years. 6 years of time was enough to completely grind away a person's vigilance. 6 years of time even caused Hogg to start doubting himself, doubting if he had really been tamed. But at the critical moment, he still made a choice that belonged to the jackalen. During a wild hunt, this pet, which was much stronger than ordinary jackalans, devoured his master, killed all the retinues, regained his freedom, and began to escape. He had ruled more than one jackalen tribe, but they were all shattered and killed in the battle with other beasts and monsters. They were all exiled in the wilderness. If he had not met the black dragon, Hogg might have been a character. Of course, he was still a character now. It was already very late, and the sound of people on the battlefield gradually died down. Only the troops in charge of the follow-up work continued to wander around the battlefield. Cleaning the battlefield was not a small task. Although it was not dangerous, it was still a big project. It would probably last for a day or two. As for the other clans, they had already gathered together to celebrate. This was the first victory of the underground clans in Audiobook, so of course it was worth commemorating. They ate meat as food, drank blood as wine, and formed their own group. Whistles and roars rose and fell one after another. "Okay, I know," Caesar said to the jackalen leader. "Go and rest, your wolf cubs are waiting for you." "Allow me to leave, your majesty." After careful consideration, Caesar finally gave up the idea of turning the green dragon into a skeleton dragon. First, the pool of undead's shadow had limited power, and second, even if he could perfectly transform, he might not be able to come to bear with the consequences. Moreover, there was another hidden consideration. The green dragon was different from the calamity dragon. The calamity dragon's god was the night dragon Pharazir, while the green dragon's god was the dragon queen Tiamat. Tiamat was the common god of the pentashade dragons. Caesar was afraid that he might have to deal with that god in the future, so it was better to keep a low profile. In fact, he really wanted to have a daughter and raise them all underground. Just thinking about it made him happy. Forget it. The black dragon opened its mouth, and ice breath gushed out again. It completely froze the dead mother of poison, creating a beautiful but horrifying ice sculpture. He hadn't thought of a way to deal with the dragon's corpse yet, so he decided to keep it in cold storage for the time being. In fact, he didn't have to do this, because the corpses of all magical creatures would not decay until the elemental energy in their bodies had completely dissipated. Dragons were not undead knights. They had flesh and blood, and while the energy ensured that their flesh and blood would not decay, their flesh and blood could also lock in the energy very well. This was simply a virtuous cycle. Of course, Caesar didn't understand any of this. This blind Eladian came from another world, so some of his beliefs were deeply ingrained in him. He firmly believed that ice could better preserve dead objects, and he really did do so. This made the beastmen in charge of moving the dragon's corpse suffer. The frozen green dragon was 30% larger than before, and these guys lived in the scorching heat of the north, so their resistance to cold temperatures was quite low. After carrying the ice sculpture for a long time, they were all shivering from the cold, and even trembling as they walked. In the end, this hard work could only be left to the undead knight. For some reason, these skeletons were inexplicably compatible with the ice and snow. The Mother of Poison returned to Green Capital, to the Emerald Palace. At the same time, she brought with her the new master. Caesar began to fully take over the Green Capital's forces. As the Green Dragon's guards, the Wyverns were the first to declare their allegiance. As descendants of dragons, it was natural for them to obey the more powerful true dragon. Even if they were once Sylvia's trusted subordinates, this nature couldn't be changed. "We are happy to serve you, my master. This is our honor." The Wyvern leader crawled in front of Caesar. Sylvia's death didn't affect these guys in the slightest. The Wyverns still maintained a calm aura. Even before the Mother of Poison fell into eternal slumber, they had sworn to fight to the death for her. These guys' heads looked like a black dragon, of course, not like Caesar, but a normal black dragon, but they were smaller and sharper. They only had 2 hind legs, and their hooked toes were like enlarged chicken claws. Their forelimbs were like most birds' wings, covered in small and ugly mottled scales and feathers, and their tails were like a snake's. It was said that they were a hybrid between a true dragon and a griffin, and their teeth were very sharp. Some of them were even gifted with the ability to breathe acid, such as the Wyvern leader in front of him. Caesar had noticed it during the war. "Very good. From now on, your name will be Husky." The Battle Lizardman leader had died in battle, and this name was given to a new candidate. As descendants of dragons, although Wyverns and Battle Lizardmen had different levels, there wouldn't be any conflict between them. In order to avoid some things that might happen, Caesar decided to organize these descendants of dragons into an independent force that wouldn't interact with the other underground clans. He had already thought about it. In the future, the leader of the descendants of dragons in the Black Dragon Army would be called Husky. This was a title, a glory, a history, and a legacy. The Black Dragon was very satisfied with this. "Thank you for your gift." The Wyvern leader bowed and enjoyed it. Other than the Wyverns, Caesar also ordered his subordinates to capture the escaping thorn beast. These monsters were also very strong, especially in positional and defensive battles. They had caused a lot of losses to the Black Dragon Army, and he didn't plan to let them go. He summoned the Wyverns mainly for an important matter. "You've been by the Green Dragon's side for so long. You should know where Sylvia's treasure trove is. Bring me there." Caesar ordered the Wyvern leader. Even if the dragons were so strong and cruel, there were still countless people in Iradia who flocked to them. Among them, there were a few who were truly kind, but most of them were just using the slogan of justice to covet the rich treasures that the dragons had accumulated through killing and plundering. The death of every dragon was a celebration for the warriors. Of course, this was a normal situation. Even if Caesar was a chromatic dragon, he didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. Moreover, now was the time for the Black Dragon Army to celebrate. The rich wealth of the Green Capital, along with the eternal slumber of the Mother of Poison, everything would belong to him. However, the Wyvern leader gave him an unexpected reply. "Please forgive me, my master. The word treasure is taboo. The Green Dragon doesn't allow anyone to mention it. Even I don't know where the Mother of Poison's treasures are hidden." These words made Caesar turn around, his red eyes staring at the Wyvern leader who was prostrating himself on the ground. This guy also had a premonition that things weren't good, so he quickly added, "But, my master, I know that the Mother of Poison doesn't allow anyone to step into the Emerald Palace, and behind the main hall is an absolute forbidden area that no one dares to step into. Other than the Mother of Poison, no one knows what's there. What else could there be? Other than the treasures that she treasured like her life." Chapter 128. This is definitely the Green Dragon's treasure trove. She treats it like a treasure. This place, even the door, is a magic item filled with elemental energy. Without a spell, you won't be able to open it, Caesar. The Wyvern leader had already retreated. It had already told him everything it knew, so there was no need for it to stay in the Emerald Palace. Caesar sent it to the mixed lizardmen and wyverns. Now, the one talking to the black dragon was the child of the forest, Luna. Can't open it? Caesar looked up and down at the door that was more than 20 meters long and wide. He couldn't help but think of the legendary story of Open Sesame in his previous life. Spell? Iradia was really imaginative. In fact, he had already come into contact with similar things. The statue and the steel door in the ruins of the Orc City were also magic items that needed to be unshackled by flames. Caesar still used the same old trick. He swung his tail with enough force to flip a giant dragon and directly used it on the door of the treasure trove. A familiar scene appeared. Ripples of magical power appeared on the surface of the door, made of mithril and engraved with the picture of a green dragon. Silently, it absorbed all of Caesar's power without any reaction. Then, a slight tremor came from the Emerald Palace. This thing had a unique conductive structure that could distribute the force received to the treetop fortress below, or even to the entire green capital. If one wanted to destroy it with brute force, one would need to have the power to flip the entire green capital over. Of course, the green dragon wouldn't let anyone steal her treasure so easily. She would definitely guard it to the death. Even if she died, the Mother of Poison would probably want to bring all these things to hell. If it was the Caesar of the past, he would probably be helpless at this moment. But it didn't seem to be the case now. The spotless land. This guy directly used the power of command. He couldn't wait any longer. Although he didn't view wealth as much as life like other true dragons, Caesar couldn't resist the temptation of wealth. Moreover, he really needed money. A cool breeze came, and the elemental energy floating around was instantly annihilated and disappeared without a trace. At the same time, the flowing inscriptions on the mithril door also disappeared, as if it had lost its power. It's been destroyed. Sure enough, it works. Luna's exclamation and the black dragon's whisper were heard at the same time. This was only Caesar's attempt. Judging from the characteristics of the Spotless Land annihilation spell, he guessed that the power of command would also work on magical objects. He was determined to give it a try. What happened next confirmed his hypothesis. The mithril door, which was valued by the green dragon and used to guard the treasure vault, was as fragile as a bubble in front of the dustless land. It would burst with a single poke, and its effectiveness would collapse. Caesar did not have the time to be amazed. He was more concerned about the green dragon's treasure. He reached out his tail claw and gently pushed it, and the door opened with a bang. What she saw next made little Luna let out an "oh" sound. The first thing that came into view was an inestimable amount of yellow, shiny gold coins, and neatly arranged, unpolished gold bars. The amount and value of the gold bars were enough to make one's heart skip a beat. And behind them there were diamonds, pearls, and gemstones. Caesar grabbed a handful of them and rubbed them in his hand. The treasures were like a waterfall, and when they fell one by one, they made a crisp sound like hail hitting glass. And the most eye-catching thing was the neatly arranged magical objects placed in the crystal containers. There were more than 10 of the rare treasures in Iradia here, and all of them were shining brightly, as if they were welcoming the arrival of a new owner. However, no! Luna screamed. It was as if there was an invisible hand that gently brushed past, slow but firm. The magical objects all cracked and collapsed under it, and then lost their effectiveness one by one. At the same time, Caesar felt the pressure. The power of the spotless land came from his spirit, but to destroy so many magical objects, his spirit was rapidly being drained and lost. Drowsiness and exhaustion hit him like a tide. "Stop," he said. But it was already too late. 3 magical items were annihilated and turned into ordinary decorations. The dustless land was as ferocious as a flood. Caesar was distracted for a moment and was careless. The little one flapped her wings and rushed towards the magical objects in the crystal containers like a little money grubber, hugging the destroyed magical objects. Actually, the forest fairies were not greedy. They were not interested in gold coins and treasures, but they had a special fondness for magical objects. This is the freezing glove, this, the sweet dream sleeping bag, and this one, the shadow robe. Luna was so distressed that she felt like crying, "Wuru, they're all destroyed." The forest fairies were not like dragons, wanting to take any treasure for themselves. Luna was just distressed. Due to their race, the forest fairies would involuntarily feel a sense of appreciation towards magical objects. This was their nature. Due to their high sensitivity towards magic and elements, they could also distinguish the authenticity, effectiveness, and grade of magical objects at a glance. At the same time, they would think that magical objects were the crystallization of wisdom, and could feel the effort that the forger of the object had put into it, resonating with this spirit. This was an extremely strange feeling for a true dragon, but it did exist. The forest fairies would treat all magical objects as if they were their own, hoping that their owners would use and cherish these treasures well. That was why little Luna was very distressed. However, the simple-minded Caesar would not have such feelings. He had only extracted information from Luna's words, and after learning that the 3 items were not powerful items, he breathed a sigh of relief. However, just by looking at them, it could be seen that whether it was the placement, the materials, or the structure of these items, they were all far from the high-grade items behind. They were probably just magical objects that had reached the lowest standard to enter the Green Dragon's treasury. It's okay. It's not a loss to test the ability of the spotless land. Caesar comforted himself. If he knew that a magical object close to legendary, the Void Staff, had been destroyed in the Green Dragon's stomach, who knew what he would think? Wait! Luna suddenly looked up and stopped whining. Caesar, did you destroy all these magical objects? She suddenly realized that the mithril door had only cracked open after the dark dragon's whisper. And just now, Caesar had softly told them to stop, and only then did the continuous destruction of the magical items stop. Could it be yes? Caesar nodded repeatedly. Why, I destroyed my own things, do I have to pay for it? This is Mage's Disjunction? This is a secret technique recorded in the secret scrolls of some legendary races. Of course, Luna did not intend to let Caesar pay for it. In contrast, she was more concerned about her black dragon's growth. How do you know this spell? My talent has awakened. I'm a true dragon. He had no choice. Although he didn't want to lie to little Luna, he couldn't possibly tell her that he had a black dream. Even if Caesar wanted to tell the little girl the truth, he couldn't say it out loud. In Elydia, who was shrouded in the light of divine authority, there were some things that might cause chaos if he said it. This was not a joke, but the truth. Caesar had already felt that the light of Iradia's divine authority was too dazzling. Theology suppressed everything. In this place, even the basic science of medicine could not be born. All diseases and injuries were summarized as curses. Perhaps it had been born, but Caesar did not continue to think about it. Chapter 129. This is a grappling whip. Its effect is to wrap up any creature that is below the limit of its size. The so-called limit refers to creatures that are less than half the length of the whip. Humans, gnolls, and the like can all be caught. Little Luna led the big black dragon over one by one. She was blindly explaining the effects of the magical items on display to the Iradia. But monsters as big as you can't be caught at all. Storage shoulder strap, There are words on it. It was made by Byron. Oh, Byron. That's a brilliant elven blacksmith. This place was a collection of all the magical items that the Green Dragon had collected over the past 400 years. It was priceless. It is connected to a small dimensional space. The user can easily locate and store any item in it. But there is also a limit to the size. Caesar followed closely behind Luna like a student. He listened attentively to the little girl's detailed explanation. He also took notes in his mind, memorizing the effects of each magical item. The green dragon's treasury was extremely rich. Even if the magical items were not taken into account, the value of the treasures alone was enough to buy half a city and a few armies. Unfortunately, true dragons were no different from goblins in this regard. They were only interested in rolling around and sleeping in piles of shiny treasures. They did not know that gold, silver, and gems that were not spent were no different from a pile of rock. Transformation necklace. Pure mithril. This should be the more advanced kind. Let me see. Luna easily picked up the necklace that was about her size. Mithril was stronger than steel, but as light as a feather. It was a type of magical metal that Iradia was mainstream. The Northern Alliance alone had more than 4 mithril mines. It has 2 customizable templates. You can change your disguise. Let's try it, Luna muttered. Then she glanced at Caesar and began to use the magical item. Pop. The sound was like a brocade fish blowing bubbles. It was light and simple. Under the cover of a light-colored magical aura, Luna began to change her appearance. Soon, a small Caesar appeared in front of Caesar. That's right, Luna transformed herself into a dragon, imitating Caesar's form. Her appearance was exactly the same, even her eyes were dark red, but her body was 10 times smaller than his, belonging to the miniature version. However, this was clearly a knockoff. Caesar could see through the verification device that even after becoming a dragon, the little guy's ability value remained between 1 and 2. However, with Caesar's body size, even if it was shrunk by 10 times, it would still be more than a meter long, which was much larger than Luna's original 30 centimeters. That's all I can do. Luna, who had turned into a miniature version of Caesar, looked up at the black dragon. Although I can change my disguise at will, if I want to change the size of my body, I still need to be strong enough. This is all I can do. You'd better change, don't copy me, okay? It looks weird enough. Caesar poked her with his hooked toe joint. Okay, wait for me to remove this template, then add a new one. This requires a little bit of magic input, but it's very little, even I can do it easily. Pop. This time, the little guy turned into the appearance of a proper female black dragon. Her body was so thin that only skin and bones were left. Her jagged wings were like those of a skeletal dragon, her facial bones pierced through the skin, and there were dark gray scales. This appearance subconsciously reminded Caesar of Blakesia. Speaking of which, he really didn't know where those 2 idiots had gone, and he didn't have time to inquire about them. How is it? Does it look good? Luna asked excitedly, wagging her tail that had never been there before, circling in front of him. It seemed that the little guy's liveliness was back, and she was having a lot of fun. I think so. Because her body was already more than 1 meter long, the previous pinching and holding could no longer be used, so Caesar directly carried her over. Iradia Black Dragon really doesn't look good. Oh, okay. Luna didn't say anything, and probably couldn't understand Caesar's aesthetics. With a bang, she returned to her original form, becoming a pocket-sized girl again, and held up the transformation necklace. Do you want to try? Caesar. Yes, Caesar said. In fact, in order to facilitate movement, no true dragon would always maintain their original form. Even the red dragon, who considered herself mighty and hated other forms, would use transformation magic when necessary. Caesar was the same. In fact, a long time ago, Caesar had thought about a very serious question, and that was, if he came to Iradia and transformed into a dragon, would he still be human? From a biological point of view, he was no longer human. Moreover, after arrival, he, who had obtained a certain amount of basic knowledge of dragons, even his way of thinking was likely to have changed. This process was irreversible, and he was no longer the original Qin Jing. Of course, he wasn't a completely pure true dragon, because the human way of thinking was still dominant, and he didn't inherit many of the true dragon's habits, such as glory, greed, and so on. For him, it was enough to understand these 2 points. After all, he wasn't a philosopher or a thinker, and there was no need to think deeper. He already knew that he was no longer the human he used to be, but he wasn't a true dragon either. He was Caesar. Caesar Ortoronso Tangerine. Under this premise, the body was no longer important. Caesar didn't care, and was even more interested in his current appearance. But now, he did need to use the transformation necklace because there was a practical need. It was possible that he had to rely on this thing to deal with the enemy hiding in the northern kingdoms. Roy. Caesar didn't think that directly starting a war would work. Absolute power could indeed sweep through everything, but the Black Dragon didn't have that kind of power. Even if he could completely digest the remnants of Green Capital, and had a strong army in the future, attacking Khaki meant that he would have to contend against the entire Northern Kingdom's alliance, and he still wasn't qualified. The Mother of Poison and Caesar weren't the only 2 evil dragons north of Iradia, but the Green Dragon didn't attack the Northern Kingdoms, and neither did the other Pentashade dragons. Caesar didn't want to be the first. There were only 2 outcomes for being the first. Either you earned a lot of money and became rich overnight, or you were hanged from the mast and used as an example. After the Battle of Green Capital, Caesar felt that his good luck was about to run out, and he didn't dare to gamble again. Yes, the spotless land was strong, and he could easily deal with a great wizard, but what about 10? Or 100? Then what was the point of fighting? He had to use some other methods. That's right. Why don't I go to Black Dream and see if I can get some useful rewards from this battle? Black Dream and Iradia's time didn't interfere with each other, so Caesar didn't have to worry about the little guy holding the necklace, and directly emptied his consciousness into the dark space. Chapter 130. Caesar was disappointed. The Black Dream was as silent as ever, as if even the air did not exist. There was only the display case that towered into the sky, the trophies in it competing with each other, sparkling brightly. But none of them left the display case and appeared in front of him. They were separated by an anti-theft glass, probably strong enough to make the gods shrink back. It shouldn't be. The Black Dragon stood up on its hind legs and stood up foolishly, pacing back and forth in front of the display case, thinking back and forth. Logically speaking, there was no doubt that the Green Dragon was an incomparably strong opponent. Defeating her and seizing the power of the Green Capital, logically speaking, there should be some sort of reward. Even if it was a bronze-level reward, there should at least be some sort of reward. Caesar had lowered his expectations quite a bit, but the Black Dream was dead silent, no one answered. It seemed to have a hidden operating system, but there were no signs of intelligence. Even with the level of scientific development in his previous life, there were widespread human-computer interaction systems on Earth, but this Black Dream that came with him did not have the slightest sign of humanity. So he could only rely on the Black Dragon to guess it himself. Defeating the Green Dragon and taking over the Green Capital was a milestone victory. In the Black Dream, the most likely achievement rewards were strong enemy, authority, and revenge. But strong enemy and authority had appeared before, and considering the possibility that the trophies might exist, it was understandable that they did not appear. But the trophy related to revenge also did not appear. This was something that Caesar did not expect. In fact, he entered the dark space this time for it. But the Black Dream did not seem to want to fulfill Caesar's wish. Why? Caesar thought for a moment and quickly understood. It was actually very easy to guess. The Green Dragon was not his direct target for revenge, and could even be considered as a side character. The initiator was someone else, Roy and the Brendel family. In that case, killing the Green Dragon, the Mother of Poison, was far from the end. In fact, it was just the beginning. Well, since there was nothing new in the dark dream, Caesar did not continue to stay here. There was nothing to see, and he had more or less guessed the reward for the achievement, so he turned around and left the dark space. At this moment, if one were to observe carefully enough, they would notice that the black dragon's pupils had slightly dilated and then contracted. This meant that Caesar had returned to reality. Little Luna was still holding the transformation necklace in her hand. Only then did she ask him, "Caesar, do you want to input your own mana to construct the disguise form template?" Because she mistook the dustless land for the mage's disjunction, Luna believed the explanation of Black Dragon's talent awakening. She thought that he really awakened the elemental bloodline and had magic power flowing in his body. The little fellow didn't even think about it. If there really was magic in Caesar's body, how could she not detect it? "No, it's better if you help me." Fortunately, Caesar was not so arrogant that he didn't know himself. He knew very well that he was ignorant of the law. There was not even a little elemental mana in his body, so he couldn't complete such an operation. In fact, it was still unknown to him whether he could use magic items like a real dragon. "Okay." Luna nodded. The little fellow's mind was relatively straightforward. She didn't think of anything else. She nodded subconsciously. "What kind of disguise form do you want?" Constructing the disguise form according to Caesar's description sounded like a very difficult technical work, but in fact it was not difficult for Luna at all, because the two already had a very tacit understanding. The little fellow had made more than 60 illustrations of game cards under Caesar's description, which were all drawn by her stroke by stroke. No wonder the little fellow attached so much importance to it. She had been constantly thinking about it and begged Caesar to help her wherever she went. "Well," Caesar thought for a moment, then began to describe, "I want a human noble. The kind with soft skin and tender flesh. At the same time, don't be too young. About 30 years old, but don't have a beard." Of course, Caesar was not making the face based on personal preference. He asked Luna to make the character for a purpose. In the current situation, the Black Dragon needed a human disguise form to ensure that he could enter the northern kingdoms openly without being besieged. In a short period of time after leaving the Black Dream, Caesar had a rough plan in his mind and had already begun to implement it. Have a healthy body, don't be deformed, don't be ugly, and the appearance must conform to the orthodox aesthetic of the Iradia humans. Sigh, he sighed in annoyance. It means that the appearance must be good-looking. Logically speaking, to enter the northern kingdoms, there should be no requirements for the appearance, as long as it was a human. However, Caesar wanted to play the role of a noble, and it had to be the kind of noble with a long history. And the children of that kind of family could not be too ugly, unless they were deformed themselves. Because, even if there were political considerations, the nobles would not marry women who were too ugly as their wives. Most of their wives belonged to the category of beauty in the human aesthetic. In this way, due to genetic screening from generation to generation, the children of the families with a long history would not be related to ugliness. Some accidental genetic mutations were not included in this category, and of course, illegitimate children were not included in this category. The reason why Caesar had requirements for the appearance was because of this. A good appearance could indirectly increase the credibility of his noble identity, which had a great impact on his plan. "All right, according to your description, it should be like this." Luna handed the transformation necklace to him. "Try it first. If it doesn't work, spit it out. We'll discuss and change it." The Black Dragon opened his mouth, and the little fellow stuffed the necklace into his mouth bit by bit. To be honest, Caesar was not confident at this time. The true dragons used magical items by relying on the elemental bloodline to resonate with the items in their stomach, so that they could use the effects of the magical items. However, this Black Dragon who was ignorant of magic did not have any elemental bloodline in his body. "Let's try it." Caesar thought that if he had it, he had it. If he didn't, he didn't. There was no need to be nervous. In fact, if the transformation necklace did not work, he could also use the autonomous control unit to adjust his body, but that would be troublesome and risky. Once he did that, it would be too difficult to change back into a dragon. That would make him very worried. At the same time, the underground clans that followed him because of his identity as a true dragon were likely to scatter after that, and even Hogg might run away. Caesar had full control of his body. At this time, he could feel that thing entering his stomach. Soon, a wonderful feeling of telepathy appeared in Caesar's mind. He knew that he had an additional ability. It worked, pup. Just like the soft sound that Luna made when she changed her disguise, Caesar's originally strong and ferocious body quickly shrank and even disappeared, turning into the appearance of an ordinary human. "Oh, Caesar, you look much better now." Luna's little eyes were shining as she kept circling around him. Forest fairies were also considered humanoid creatures, so their natural beauty was naturally inclined towards humanoid beauty, so much so that they had no feelings for true dragons. Even when Caesar's appearance changed greatly while he was in hibernation, the little fellow did not exclaim in admiration or praise, because in her eyes, all true dragons looked the same, and there was no difference apart from the color. But when Caesar turned into a human, it was different. Her treatment changed greatly, and the forest fairy Luna seemed to be very happy, circling around him and commenting, clicking her tongue in wonder. However, Caesar's attention was not on this. The first thing he paid attention to was the ability value that suddenly plummeted countless times in the assessment device. Scan analysis result. Carbon-based life comprehensive combat ability assessment, 40/50. To be honest, this value was relatively high among humans, about the same as an elite warrior without the ability to cast spells, but to the black dragon, it was no different from a joke, equivalent to a collapse. After using the disguise state, his ability value decreased by 10 times. This was extremely unreasonable. He was not a true dragon that relied on magic to fight. No matter how the transformation necklace's pseudo-state was, Caesar's strength was not reduced or limited, so logically, there should not be such a situation where the value of his ability value plummeted. This made Caesar wonder if there was a problem with the assessment device. "I'll try it with Hogg later." He could not help but think. Chapter 131. Come, attack me. In the lapis lazuli hall of the Emerald Palace, Caesar said to the gnoll leader Hogg. Speaking of which, this was the first time he found this guy to be so intimidating. The gnoll in front of him was astonishingly large. With a height of nearly 2.5 meters, all humans had to look up to him. His fangs were sharp, his muscles bulged, and the bristling mane on his back was like steel needles. He was completely different from ordinary gnolls. "But, Your Majesty," because Caesar had already turned into a weak human disguise, Hogg bent down as much as possible so that he would not look down on him. The gnoll was a little worried. Caesar's current appearance was a very ordinary human noble. He was harmless, thin, and weak, as if a gust of wind could blow him down. Hogg was a little afraid that he would really hurt him. "I told you to attack me, Hogg." Although the Black Dragon Lord's voice had changed, it was still majestic. The gnoll leader smacked his lips. To be honest, he did not want to insist, but the pretense of declining and the necessary respect of a servant was still necessary. So, after getting Caesar's approval, Hogg waved his sharp claws. A whistling wind sounded. This guy's forelimbs were longer than ordinary gnolls, and his attack range was wider. His claws were as thick as a bear's and full of strength. However, this was only Hogg's tentative attack, so Caesar easily dodged it. In human form, Caesar bent down and controlled his body, which was not very skilled. Instead of retreating, he moved forward and closed in. Then, he kicked Hogg's slightly bent knee. Of course, this was not Caesar's ultimate strength. His ultimate strength was estimated to be able to shatter Hogg. In human disguise, Caesar could vaguely feel the existence of a limit. This was the highest strength he could exert within this limit. However, the results were not satisfactory. Hogg did feel the pain in his knee, but the battle-hardened Jackalan leader was not affected at all. His body did not react at all, and he continued to attack. Caesar, on the other hand, was the first to be pushed back by the recoil. This was too weak, Caesar thought as he elbowed Hogg's claws. This time, he began to use more strength than he could vaguely remember. Pop! A crisp and clear sound rang out. The hair on Hogg's back instantly stood on end. His experience in the Colosseum, and even in the wild, made him instinctively feel danger. He immediately gave up on attacking and got down on all fours. He quickly retreated and ran far away. What a headache! Caesar looked at his own claws and muttered. The 16 meters tall, strong black dragon instantly reappeared in the Emerald Palace. Fortunately, Hogg had already escaped, otherwise, he would have been badly injured. Caesar understood. His ability did not decrease or limit, but his disguise could not support and output such a powerful force. Once he exceeded that limit, his disguise would be forced to lose effect. No wonder the value in the verification device was only 40 or 50. So that's why. Fortunately, this thing was not a one-time use magic item, so in the fine magic light, Caesar returned to his human disguise. "Attack me, Hogg," he continued to say to the Jackalan leader. Hogg panted and slowly walked back. The Jackalan had just burst out with the speed of survival, so it was still quite tiring. At this time, the clever gnoll had already guessed what the Black Dragon Lord wanted to do. It should be testing some kind of ability. In order not to annoy the gnoll, Hogg didn't say anything. He nodded and attacked again. The whistling wind and sharp wolf claws approached for the second time. But this time, Caesar did not move. He did not even blink. In the next second, the wolf claws made contact with his body. In fact, at this time, Hogg immediately reacted and subconsciously restrained his strength, but the sharp claws still cut through the human skin. Pop! And so, Hogg fled again. Well, now it was even worse. He had been beaten back to his original form. The black dragon that reappeared smacked its lips and rubbed its chin with its hooked toes, clicking its tongue in wonder. He did not know if it was his problem or the transformation necklace, but this thing had too many restrictions. In the disguised state, Caesar could not fully exert his strength, nor could he let himself be hurt. The slightest mistake would cause him to explode on the spot. The only good thing was that Caesar did not need to rely on this disguise to do too much. In his plan, as long as he could go to the northern kingdoms, enter the Khaki territory, and come into contact with the core members of the Brendel family, the disguise would be torn off and the black dragon would show its fangs at that moment. It sounded simple, but it was not that easy to accomplish. The twists and turns, the difficulties and obstacles, Caesar could guess and anticipate in advance even if he did not experience it himself. People like Roy were usually cautious, and now that they were at war with the Lion Kingdom, they were nervous to the extreme. At this time, the Brendel family would definitely be on guard against all assassinations, poisons, and any possible trap. The whereabouts of these people were probably kept a secret. Even their own soldiers would not be able to see them if they did not swear allegiance to them, not to mention people of unknown origins. Without enough information and channels, they probably did not even know where the Brendel family was. This was also the reason why Caesar disguised himself as a human noble. If it was someone else who did not have enough status, this matter would be even more difficult. He could not just tear off his disguise and start killing like a headless fly the moment he entered the Khaki territory. That would be playing himself to death. Caesar returned to his disguised state. He felt that he needed to briefly learn the human noble etiquette, so that he would not expose himself when the time came. Hogg should know these things. Didn't the Gnoll leader say that? His master when he was young was a noble, and it was time for him to prove it. Hog, Caesar was about to call the gnoll over, but he found that the gnoll was looking at him strangely. In fact, Hog had been looking at him strangely ever since he saw him this time. However, Caesar had been thinking about the transformation necklace at that time and did not take it to heart. Now he finally noticed it. He did not ask Hog. His intuition told him that the problem was with his disguise, so Caesar found a mirror in the Emerald Palace and looked at himself. He immediately understood why Hog had that indescribable look in his eyes. Luna! I want a male human noble, a male. A proper human. Not a half-elf human noble who can't differentiate their gender. Chapter 132. Luna knew that she had made a mistake and did not dare to be mischievous anymore. She followed Caesar's request and began to change the camouflage template in the transformation necklace, adjusting it until the black dragon was satisfied. The matter regarding the transformation necklace came to an end for now. But in reality, due to the urgent research on the necklace, the black dragon had not finished browsing through all the magic items. In the green dragon's treasury, there were still some things that he had to pay attention to. Hey, Caesar, look what I found! Using her mana as a rope, Luna struggled to drag a heavy weapon and shakily came in front of him. This is a real treasure. In this era where divine artifacts are not seen, it is a supreme treasure. Caesar heard her and looked over. At first glance, there was nothing special about the item. The material was ordinary, the color was dull, and there were even traces of rust in some places. It looked like an abandoned item from a long time ago. But in reality, it was a legendary treasure. The green dragon was very sneaky. He applied a layer of camouflage on it, covered its scent, and threw it in a corner of the treasury where no one cared about it. Then he sprinkled some dust on it, making it very easy for people to miss it. But with the forest fairies' innate sensitivity and wisdom, they finally found it. Magic item, Isaac thirst for blood. Such a treasure, every one of them was unique and could not be replicated. It was a legendary item, and even had its own spirituality. It could imprint its own history inside the item, allowing outsiders to see it. This axe was first used by one of the commanders of the Orc Empire, Isaac. Because of his charm, military talent, and pure nature of violent destruction, the ancient Orc Isaac was blessed by the gods in the year 783 of the Second Era. He attracted the Eye of Gush and led his bone-shattering tribe to glory. But because of his love for weapons and his desire for power, Isaac came up with a crazy plan. He tried to infuse the divine power of the Eye of Gush into his axe, so that he could gain great power that he could control. He tried painstakingly, and the results told him that it was possible. However, the ancient orcs were betrayed in the process. In the end, Isaac was betrayed and killed. The crazy plan was ruined, and the entire bone-shattering tribe came to an end. However, his axe was still infused with divine power, and thus evolved and sublimated. Even now, it still thirsts for blood. Isaac thirsty blood. Caesar played with it in his claws. This was a heavy axe with a short handle. The edge of the blade was not neat and was serrated. To Caesar, it was as small as a toy. It was only a little bigger than the little girl Luna. However, the inside of it was filled with majestic power, so much so that Caesar could feel it. The forest fairies were experts on equal footing with true dragons when it came to identifying magical items, which was why Luna quickly understood its effects and began to explain it to the black dragon. As a legendary item, Thirsty Blood was much more powerful than the howl in the hands of the Black Knight Nigendro. Just the weapon alone had more than 3 characteristics: cut, measure, strength, was silent, and pain. Of course, these were only the most basic characteristics of the weapon. The user would be given the Dark Spell, Immobilization Spell, and Berserk Spell 3 times a day. Apart from that, thirsty blood itself had a unique and special intention: fatal despair. Although this was an effective spell of the hallucination type, its effect was equally powerful. It could almost be effective on all creatures below the legendary level. What would happen next would depend on the will of the caster. It would not be surprising if the caster went crazy or committed suicide. A legendary item! Luna exclaimed repeatedly. Caesar was also amazed. Both of them were country bumpkins who had never seen anything good. But Luna's excitement stemmed from her appreciation of the treasure, while the black dragon's was purely due to a sense of accomplishment and possessiveness. At this moment, under the gaze of Luna, the black dragon's throat made a gurgling sound. Soon, he vomited out the transformation necklace that he had swallowed. It sounded a little disgusting, but in reality, no one would refuse this process. In fact, they could not wait for a true dragon to do this because it was probably the cleanest thing in the world. A magical item that went one round around the stomach of a true dragon, not to mention the dust on it. Even bacteria, viruses, and all other microorganisms would be wiped clean. Luna picked up the transformation necklace that the black dragon had vomited on the ground and watched as he swallowed the legendary weapon into his stomach. How would a true dragon use a weapon? It was very simple. Just like other magical items, after the elemental blood resonated with it, the weapon's characteristics would be attached to the true dragon's claws and fangs. Its additional spells would also appear in the true dragon's mind, allowing the true dragon to cast them easily. But Caesar could not. He did not feel it. In fact, he felt it, but it was not complete. The connection was weak. Of the 4 major weapon characteristics, only cut and measure strength appeared in his claws and fangs. As for the additional effective spells, Caesar could only cast dark sorcery. Immobilization and berserk did not appear. As for fatal despair, he did not even know how to cast it. It was useless for him. Caesar finally understood that the transformation necklace was not rubbish. The problem was with him. But this guy was not angry or ashamed. For a true dragon who did not have elemental blood, he was already very happy to be able to use a magical item. Caesar did not ask for much. Ugh! Thinking about it, he vomited blood again. Originally, the black dragon was a little worried that the sharp saw blade of the legendary weapon would cut his throat and trachea. But in fact, it would not. God Io had already considered this when he made the rules. There was a complete set of detailed and complete basic rules. Caesar, you are really arrogant. You don't even care about a legendary item. Luna, like a little follower, helped him pick up the thing he vomited. She muttered and then asked seriously, "Is it not to your liking? How can a legendary weapon not be to my liking? It's just that I can't use it." The black dragon shook his head sadly. He lowered his body and put his neck flat on the ground. His tail drooped and swayed unconsciously. After a pause, he asked, "Luna, if this thing is not to be used, what do you think should be done with it?" "Of course, like the big green dragon, put it in the treasury and keep it. This is a treasure. A legendary creation is priceless. Countless races are scrambling for it." Little Luna was still staring at Isaac's blood. "You can also build a crystal display in the palace, seal it, and admire it every day as a work of art. You will be happy to look at it every day." "No." Caesar thought for a moment and refused to agree with the little girl's words. He looked at her with disdain and said righteously, "You guys are the ones who ruined the culture of Eladia." At the same time, he had made a decision in his heart. He shouted to the wyvern that was on standby outside the Emerald Palace, "Go and find the orc leader and the gnoll leader." Chapter 133. My Lord. Your Majesty. Gaul and Hogg appeared in front of him. It was worth mentioning that this was the 3rd time the gnoll leader had been summoned today. Hogg had to run back and forth between the tribe's habitat and the Emerald Palace 3 times. However, this guy was not impatient at all. He still arrived quickly and entered the Emerald Palace with the Orc commander Gaul. Look at this. Caesar did not waste time. He held the legendary weapon with his tail claw and handed it to them. Whether it was Gaul or Hog, they were the first to join Caesar's forces. The Orc and Gnoll clans they led were also the core clans of the current Black Dragon army. Therefore, Caesar valued them very much. They were the foundation that he could rely on. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were his right-hand men. Hog and Gaul were indeed rare powerhouses in their own clans. However, as Caesar's bets expanded, their strength gradually became weaker. Whether it was the demon hound leader Nero, the Black Knight Nigendro, the skeletal dragon Angramo, or even the newly joined wyvern leader Husky, they were all stronger than them. To these clans, without strength, they had no confidence. Caesar's original plan was to lead the shapeshifters into the northern kingdoms and return after tearing apart Roy. However, that would take at least 2 weeks. He was prepared to leave Emerald City to Hog and Gaul for the time being. However, Black Dragon was worried that once he left, this place would be in chaos. This was not a baseless guess. It was an inevitable fact. The underground clans had just experienced the first 5-year plan. The newly recruited wyverns and thorn beasts were also chaotic clans. It was their nature. It was likely that even if Black Dragon only left for 3 days, this place would be in chaos. Without strength, Hog and Gaul would have a hard time stabilizing the situation. They could not go to the Underdark and summon the undead to suppress them, could they? Therefore, in order to give them more confidence, Caesar decided to bestow the legendary weapon he had no use for, Isaac Bloodlust, to his 2 loyal family members to see which one of them was more suitable for the job. My lord, this is. Gaul took the treasure and held it in both hands. He wanted to ask the Black Dragon Lord about the origin of the treasure, but after seeing its full appearance, the Orc stopped talking. The origin of Isaac's thirst for blood was related to the Orcs. Gaul could even see through it. His pupils were immersed in that history as if he could see the past. After a while, the Orc commander came back to his senses. He gripped his short battle axe tightly with both hands, his chest heaving up and down violently. After a while, he said to the Black Dragon Lord, "My lord, it records the past glory and filth of the ancient Orc Empire. Can you use it?" "Yes." Gaul nodded. He took 2 steps forward and knelt down again. He held the legendary heavy axe with both hands and handed it back to the Black Dragon. "But, I beg you to take back this treasure. This is not something that the Orcs should use." "Why?" "Because it has the blood of our clansmen on it." Gaul bared his teeth and said with bulging eyes, "This belongs to the traitor." The Orc commander Isaac was a rat nailed to the pillar of shame. He was the one who destroyed the Eye of Gush. The reason why the ancient Orc Empire fell apart was because of 2 betrayals, the Broken Bone tribe and the Giant tribe. The Broken Bone tribe destroyed our divine item, while the Giant tribe betrayed us in the War of the Setting Sun. This is a hatred that every Orc must remember. Even if we are skinned alive and cursed for eternity, we will never forget. Gaul let out an uncontrollable roar. Caesar listened quietly. Of course, he was not interested in learning about the history of the ancient Orc Empire, nor was he interested in digging up old scores. But out of respect, Caesar waited for Gaul to finish speaking before taking back the blood of thirst. In his opinion, the Orcs were a little too stupid. Their bottom line was a little too high. They weren't even willing to use the enemy's weapon. Was the name of a traitor really that important? After all, this was a legendary weapon. But after thinking about it, Caesar understood. He did not understand the story of the Orcs, nor did he experience that history. Naturally, he could not empathize with their feelings. Understand. The Black Dragon, who had always been understanding, couldn't help but feel a heavy heart at this moment. He was led astray by the orc Garland, and used his tail to pass the legendary weapon back to Hogg, saying with a cold face, "Here. Your Majesty." This Hogg was stunned. He had heard Gaul's words. He had thought that he had nothing to do with it, but the black dragon made an unexpected decision. "You want to reward it to me? Yes, you have done well." With the black dragon lord's affirmation, Hogg dared to slowly take the weapon. He was not an idiot who did not know what was good for him. As a knowledgeable gnoll, he knew the value of Isaac's blood of thirst. Such a treasure could buy 10 large clans of gnomes, half of a fertile city, or 3 elite armies. It could also be exchanged for the chastity of a silver dragon. In the eyes of dragons, silver dragons were the most beautiful true dragons. Such a treasure, and the black dragon lord had given it to him. Hogg was overwhelmed with emotions. His eyes were filled with disbelief. If it were not for the fact that gnolls did not have tears, and that his personality was limited, he would probably have burst into tears. But even so, this huge and strong gnoll lowered his head, his body trembling slightly. Speaking of which, after escaping from the hands of humans, Hogg also had a certain amount of ambition. He also desired power and strength. He wanted to gather and build his forces, take over a mountain, and become a lord. However, as a greedy, cruel, dirty, and despicable gnoll, no other race was willing to follow Hogg. Moreover, during his exile in the wilderness, he had seen too many races that were stronger than the gnolls. The cruel reality beat him until he bent over. Hogg found that with the identity of a gnoll, he could not become a so-called lord at all. The power that he thought was strong was gradually shattered in one battle after another. In order to survive, he even knelt down and begged for mercy from the grizzly bears. Later, Hogg gave up. He hoped to just eat and wait for death. It did not matter who he followed, and he could barely live out the rest of his life. Even in that illusory dream, he never thought that one day he would be able to obtain a legendary treasure. Hogg was silent for a long time. After a long time, he slowly raised his head and looked directly at Caesar. Then, he opened his mouth, stuffed his claws into it, and pulled out a sharp and small fong from the innermost part of his mouth. "Your Majesty." Hogg handed the fong to the black dragon and repeated the words they said when they first met. "As long as you are willing, the fearless gnoll will be the sharpest guillotine in your hand." True dragons were all stingy people. In all these years, Elijah had never heard of a true dragon who would give such a precious treasure to his subordinates. Hogg was well aware of the value of this gift. "Help me guard this acre of land. When I return, I want to see everything in Green Capital in order, better than when I left. I promise you." Chapter 134. At present, the civil war in the Lion Kingdom of the Alliance of Northern Kingdoms was still in full swing. At the same time, the black dragon that had come out of nowhere had silently replaced the Mother of Poisons as the new master of Green Capital. Iradia's third era, year 1633. Nina returned to his high chair and sat with the other young nobles. He sipped the wine in his cup, and the sweet and fruity aroma of the summer red wine made his lips curl into a faint smile. The main hall of Kaki's castle was filled with cold air. The underground ice cellar was doing its best to cool down and dispel the heat of the northern dry season. The surroundings were filled with the fragrance of roasted meat and freshly baked bread. The black stone walls of the hall were filled with the banners of the Brendel family and their supporters. Indeed, the young nobles present were the heirs of the various nobles. Their heads had followed Count Brendel to the front lines and left their children in Kaki to rest, play, and enjoy themselves. Of course, they were also hostages in a sense, and he, Nina Brendel, was responsible for keeping an eye on them. At the same time, he had to control the logistics and guard the rear. Nina did not accompany his father to the front lines like his younger brother. Compared to leading an army and scheming, Nina preferred to do business, hunt, and socialize. He was a conservative nobleman who valued peace and wealth. Guarding the rear was exactly what he wanted. His father agreed to his request. But recently Nina had been worried. The reason was simple. Brendel's family had run out of money. This embarrassing problem should not have happened. Brendel's family had been guarding the borders of Khaki for hundreds of years. Even though they were not as wealthy as a country, they were still extremely wealthy. How could they run out of money just like that? But the truth was, the reason was war. Once a war was launched, resources and wealth would be depleted at a speed comparable to burning. In fact, it might even be faster than burning. Nina estimated that even if she hired 100 farmers to burn their wealth day and night, they would not be able to deplete all their wealth in a short period of time. But such a large amount of wealth was completely used up in the war. A few years ago, his younger brother Roy went crazy and went to the wilderness to fight a black dragon that came out of nowhere. That battle used up all of the wealth that the Brendel family could produce in 2 years. After 7 years of rest and recuperation, they finally managed to recover. As a result, civil war broke out. Other than the daily expenses, there was also the maintenance of the soldiers, the forging of arrows, the production of oil bombs, and the provision of supplies. None of these things did not cost money. Duke Lionheart had the entire Lion Kingdom as his backing, while the Brendel family only had the Khaki border and a group of small nobles behind them. Moreover, there was a banquet held every month in the Lord's castle at the back. Feeding these hostages was not a small expense, but it had to be done. The dignity of the nobles could not be neglected. For months after the war started, Nina realized that she was embarrassingly short of money. However, the front line was still asking for money again and again. God knew how they managed to win this war. Didn't they say that they were winning? How did they end up in a situation where they couldn't even make ends meet? What a headache. In the hall, a minstrel was strumming a harp and singing a ballad in a low voice. Her voice was sweet and her face was beautiful, but she could not be heard clearly under the noise of toasting, clattering of dishes, and drunken conversation. But Nina Brendel was not in a good mood at all. This monthly banquet had already lasted for 4 hours, but he still could not think of a way to get money. His worries grew with each passing day. After all, his father's orders could not be disobeyed. "I invite you to drink with me, my lord." Under the encouragement of the young nobles beside him, Nina drank another cup of wine. He was usually very happy to be in their company, bragging with relish about the war, hunting, and rare events that happened in the Southern Empire. But today, Nina was really not in the mood. The banquet was coming to an end, and the female attendants were patted on the buttocks by the young nobles, leaving a shy smile on their faces. Nina looked on coldly from the side, his thoughts wandering. "Have you seen him? Look at the way he speaks." He heard someone talking in a low voice. Even though the hall was noisy, he did not know why, but he could clearly hear the person's whisper, "I'm guessing that he must be a big shot. He's a great noble." Nina heard another person chiming in, "A great noble who can do well in every country on the continent." He raised his head and looked towards the source of the voice. At the end of the long table, 2 sons of knights were whispering to each other. Their expressions of amazement and envy made his heart skip a beat. The 2 men's whispers made Nina interested. He picked up a cup of wine and walked towards the 2 men. "Are you satisfied with today's dinner? Both of you?" Nina raised his cup at the end of the long table. My lord." The 2 men who were engrossed in their whispers came back to their senses and saw Nina standing beside them. They were rather flattered and fearful. Their status was worlds apart from Nina's. As the sons of ordinary knights, even though they had the opportunity to sit at the banquet table, under normal circumstances, they would not be able to talk to the host here. "We are very satisfied. The Fry family is very grateful for the Brendel family's care for us." Fortunately, they were, after all, small nobles who had some education and were not rural farmers. They quickly reacted and bowed. Then, please allow me to be presumptuous. Nina bowed slightly in return, showing the good manners of a noble. At the same time, he said with a smile, I am very interested in your topic just now. I wonder if you have the time to introduce it to me? The two men looked at each other, not knowing why the heir of a count was suddenly interested in some unknown news. You mean Count Tangerine? One of the heir of a viscount suddenly interrupted and leaned over. He first answered Nina's question, then turned around and asked the other two, Is that right? Yes, my lord. The two men replied, We were talking about this person earlier. Why, my dear Lord Beauchamp, do you know something about this? Nina thought to himself. He was just asking casually and did not have much expectations. How much knowledge could the sons of two knights have? The great noble they were talking about was probably not a big shot. But at this time, the heir of a viscount interrupted, as if he also knew about this matter. And from his mouth the word count popped out. This made Nina really interested. It seems that you have been very busy recently. The heir of a viscount named Beauchamp accompanied Nina and sat down at a small table. The waitress immediately served wine and dessert. That person has recently become famous in khaki. Why do you say that? Chapter 135. As you know, the Khaki Hill is the most dazzling pearl of the Northern Alliance. Lord Beauchamp complimented. This land of riches connected to the vast wilderness is a paradise for adventurers and an abode for profit-seekers. Poets sing for it and dancers dance for it. Every day, countless outsiders pour in here. We all know. Nina nodded. As the last transit station and supply point for humans to go to Theron Gobi, Mostel Grand Canyon, Wild Wilderness, and Green City, the flow of people in the Khaki Hill was unquestionable. Countless confident and smart-alecky adventurers poured in here, either forming teams or being hired to go to unpredictable places that were neither orderly nor secure, in an attempt to get rich overnight. Since that's the case, what happens next is logical. The Lord took a sip of tea and said, He came to the Khaki Hill some time ago. The him I mentioned is Count Tangerine. It seems that this person likes the scenery here very much and intends to settle down here. Where is he? In the freedman's residential area outside the Lord's castle. No wonder you don't know. You have been busy recently, so you naturally don't pay attention to what happens outside the aristocratic area. No, that's not right. Nina frowned. You said that he is a count, a great aristocrat? How could he condescend to live in the slums? Is he just a fallen aristocrat in name? We thought so at the time. Beauchamp shrugged, but that's where the beauty lies. Did you know that this person bought all the freedmen's residences in the Flower Lane in the Torres district? Bought all of them? Nina repeated in a murmur and then asked, Flower Lane? That's a good place in the outer city. But I remember that there are a few merchants' shops there, as well as the residences of some knights' heirs. Did they give it up so easily? As long as you are willing to spend money, there is nothing that cannot be bought. Lady Nina, I believe you know this better than I do. There are indeed some small twists and turns in the process. For example, your Knight Fry family, out of nobility, they asked for 160 gold, which is 50% higher than the market price. But guess what? That person directly bid 320 gold. As he said this, the Lord stood up and shouted towards the corner behind the long table, Little Fry, don't you agree? The abrupt question and undisguised sarcasm made the two young men whom Nina had approached feel embarrassed and angry. However, they had no choice but to smile and nod immediately. That's how it is. Nina raised her glass to them to ease their awkwardness. Even in front of these small aristocrats, her etiquette was flawless. Is he really a big shot who spends a lot of money? Millionaire? That's right, that person ordered the servants to demolish all the civilian residences in the Flower Lane and renovate them. In just a few days, a beautiful and magnificent garden mansion was built. Beecham clicked his tongue in praise. There are many people who have become rich overnight, but most of them have no taste or self-restraint. In our eyes, they are just despicable nouveau riche. But this person is different. Whether it is the taste or the layout of his mansion, it is not inferior to the Brendel family's mansion. As he said this, the Lord stood up and bowed slightly to express his apology. Please forgive my rudeness and presumptuous comparison, but with my shallow knowledge, the most elegant and luxurious mansion I have ever seen is Milord's exquisite mansion. I can only compare the two. Where did he come from? Since he is a noble and is preparing to settle down here, how could he ignore basic etiquette and visit the owner of this place first? Nina showed some dissatisfaction at the right time. Perhaps the customs are different. I heard that he is a noble from a free trade city-state in the central region. Perhaps in those cities their customs are different from ours. Beecham smiled and explained to the stranger. Yes, in the absence of conflicts of interest and emotional entanglements, who doesn't love the rich? Heard? Nina keenly grasped the key point of the matter and asked about the person's origin. Heard from whom? Well, that's what people say. Some of the small nobles standing beside the Count's eldest son interrupted. Everyone knows. Lord Beecham also nodded and then added, You will know when you see him. The Southerners look different from us Northerners. Those beautiful Southerners stroll leisurely in the city's tree-lined avenues every day, leisurely strolling in the green forests. They are not the same kind of people as the strong and brave Northerners under the scorching sun. Are you complimenting him? A stranger? Nina continued to ask. No matter what. Lord Beecham said, Count Tangerine is indeed an elegant person. Besides, I have seen him from afar once, so it's not that we don't know each other. Oh yes, he also seems to have a little elf as a pet. A little elf? Or a forest fairy? At this moment, Nina's heart could not help but palpitate as she asked subconsciously. This meant that the forest fairy had left a deep impression on him. According to his brother Roy, the black dragon who was hostile to the Brendel family had a forest fairy as a dependent. Forest fairy? Now that you mention it, I remember that it is indeed a forest fairy, not a little elf. Lord Beecham patted his head and said with a smile, Look at how ignorant I am. A little elf is an elemental creation, and a forest fairy has a physical form. That is indeed a forest fairy. At first, Nina's polite face changed color, and a faint blush flashed across his pale face. He subconsciously thought that the black dragon had snuck into the Kaji territory and was preparing to pose a great threat to the Brendel family. He wanted to immediately inform Roy and Brendel at the front lines to request for the army to return. But soon, he calmed down. It's impossible. Nina's clenched fists slowly relaxed, and at the same time, he laughed self-deprecatingly in his heart. The true dragons were not fools. Even the most stupid and lazy of the pentashade dragons would not carelessly reveal their symbolic things in front of others. This kind of low-level disguise could be seen through even by a 5-year-old child. According to Roy Brendel, the black dragon was extremely smart and cunning. If it wanted to sneak into the Kaji territory, it would have taken this into consideration. Moreover, Lord Beecham had mentioned before that the Count spent a lot of money and did not hesitate to buy all the houses in the Flower Lane. He also spent a lot of money to rebuild the elegant garden. This made Nina completely relieved. Even if the pentashade dragon Queen Tiamat were to descend and pinch the necks of the pentashade dragons with her claws, they would not do such a thing. Treasures and gold coins were their lives. No matter what, he should pay a visit to the so-called Count. Perhaps this trip could also solve the Brendel family's embarrassing problem. Nina looked forward to it. Chapter 136. The next day, Nina Brendel, dressed in a black ceremonial robe and wearing decorative carbon iron gauntlets, boarded a luxurious four-wheeled carriage with a team of guards and servants, and left Kaki's lord's castle early in the morning. He went to the flower alley in the Torreyford district to visit Count Tangerine. The gate of the garden mansion was as busy as a marketplace. Outside the new metal fence, merchants gathered together and chatted with each other. Countless mercenaries were looking forward to it. The messengers of several mercenaries were also lingering around, unwilling to leave. Of course, there were also outlaws. Many vagrants and bandits were hiding in the shadows, staring maliciously at the scenery in the garden. Why are there so many people? Nina was puzzled. Seeing this scene, he did not immediately enter the flower alley. Instead, he sent a servant to investigate. Soon, the servant came back with a report and inquired about the situation. This noble was said to be from a free trade city-state in the central region. He was quite rich and extremely generous, and became famous in a short period of time. However, in a place like Kaki's border, wealth was not a good reputation, and it immediately attracted the covetous eyes of countless people. When Count Tangerine first arrived, under the temptation of wealth, many rats that usually hid in the dark swarmed over. These vagrants and bandits joined forces, and relying on their numbers, they actually planned to directly rush into the garden and rob it. In the end, more than 100 people did not even get to see the Count's face, and they could not even get close to the noble's mansion. The Count's servants were quite valiant, just like a well-trained elite army. With only 30 servants, they cut off the limbs of these vagrants and bandits and threw them into the sewage river. Under the deterrence of blood, the bandits with evil intentions did not dare to act rashly. However, they still lingered around, looking for an opportunity. As for the mercenaries, they were attracted by the Count's generosity. It was said that the commission of the Count's servants was 10 times that of ordinary dangerous mercenaries. Serving this noble for a year was equivalent to a lifetime of hard work. These people gathered here were all eager to serve the Count. Although the Count's servants had proven their valiance, the men still hoped that they could be the lucky ones to be the first to be hired. As for the merchants, they were not in the same world as the bandits and mercenaries. They were waiting for the manager of the mansion to come and purchase goods. It was said that if that person needed something, even if the price was 50% higher than the market price, as long as there was stock, the manager of the mansion would immediately agree to buy it. So, this Earl Tangerine has only been here for a few days, but he has already gained a lot of support in the outskirts of Kaki. Nina raised her eyebrows and asked in a loud voice. The attendants didn't dare to respond. Young Master Nina was very well-mannered, but his raised eyebrows already showed that he was faintly angry. The guest overshadowed the host. He cursed in his heart. After a long while, Nina finally suppressed the anger in his heart. He calmed himself down and put on a gentle smile. He was what people called an old aristocrat. He was particular about being polite and maintaining honor and dignity, at least on the surface. "Go and knock on the door," he said. The carriage moved forward slowly. The Brendel family's flag caused the crowd outside the mansion to fall silent. They immediately retreated, but did not leave and continued to observe the alley. When the attendants went forward to inquire, Nina also looked inside. From the carriage, he could see the outer walls of the mansion, a corner of the inner garden, and servants wearing uniforms coming and going. It had to be said that if the layout of the garden was personally arranged by that noble, then his aesthetic sense was indeed superior. Whether it was the layout or the mood, or the choice of flowers and plants, as well as the arrangement of the fountain, Nina Brendel, who was born noble, could not find any fault with it, and even praised it. It was like the design of the empire where the sun never set. Nina was secretly shocked. He yearned for the empire in the south that never sets, so he had read books about it. Nina did not know that at the same time he was looking at the garden, a pair of eyes was also looking at him. The Brendel family's flag is finally here. Caesar stood in front of the window and studied the visitor from a distance. He was more careful than Nina when he was looking at the mansion and garden. This guy is not Roy. He made a disappointed gesture and began to walk back and sit down again. This face is definitely that of a noble. His cheekbones are wide and protruding, his forehead is high, his eye sockets are deep, and his mouth is thin and thin. This guy is somewhat similar to Roy, but he looks older. Is he here? The little girl Luna was flying up and down around him. She had changed out of her favorite emerald green knee-length dress and put on a dark black gauze dress. She said excitedly, Caesar, I'm a little nervous. How should I behave? Should I change my personality? Should I be firm and cold, or should I be humble and timid? You just have to be the same as before. Caesar patted her head. After using his human disguise, it was much easier to do this action. These humans have never seen you before. How would they know what the forest fairy beside the black dragon is like? And you don't need to show your face. Just show your face and show your existence. Bringing the forest fairy with him would not arouse the black dragon's suspicion and expose his disguise. Instead, it would make them believe that he had nothing to do with the black dragon. This was a reverse thinking, and Caesar was very familiar with it. At this time, the servant disguised as a shape-shifting monster came to report. Invite him in. Remember, invite. Don't forget human etiquette. Caesar agreed. Please don't worry, my lord. The shape-shifting monster retreated. When Nina Brendel walked into the guest hall, his footsteps were heavy and stiff, as if he was meeting a prince. He really could not guess what kind of person the other party was, so it was more appropriate to maintain a dignified manner for the first meeting. Other than the red velvet scarf around his neck, the Earl's eldest son was dressed in black from head to toe. Only the buttonholes of his inner shirt were inlaid with thin red rims, which complemented the scarf and showed off his exquisite aristocratic style. Greetings, sir. Although Nina Brendel had great self-control, when he bowed to return the greeting, he could not help but look at the other party with obvious curiosity. The other party's attire was extremely simple, but even the most picky old noble would not be able to find a single flaw. His entire body exuded an elegant taste. His upper garment, gloves, and boots were all made by masters, and the quality was extremely expensive. Most of them were made of the highest quality buckskin. As he spoke, Nina played a trick. He did not call the other party Count, but used the general term, Sir. This would lay the groundwork for him to find out the other party's identity later. This was the most important thing, and the purpose of his visit was this. Nina would definitely not have too much contact with a person of unknown origin. Even if he ruled out the possibility that the Black Dragon was in hiding, the other party could still be a spy sent by Duke Lionheart. So this time, Nina did not think of anything else, and only wanted to find out the other party's background. Caesar also knew this. If he wanted to come into contact with Roy and the other core members of the Brendel family, he estimated that he would have to go through this obstacle first. This guy had thought of using force to threaten him, but after thinking about it for a while, Caesar gave up on this idea. With the Brendel family's performance in the last war, if the Black Dragon's true identity was exposed, it was hard to say if force would be effective. Chapter 137. Welcome to my humble abode, sir. Please take a seat. Nina was invited to sit. The nobleman opposite him was not old, but he had a dignified appearance. His eyes were sharp and full of vitality. His tall nose was almost level with his forehead, and he had a pure southern nose. His teeth were as white as pearls, he did not have a beard, and his hair was short and black. He was not tall, but he was well proportioned. His hands and feet were small, his skin was white, and his clothes were well-fitting. Lord Beauchamp was right, he was indeed a Southerner. Nina thought and labeled him as a Southerner. At the same time he said, "Please allow me to introduce myself, sir. My name is Nina, and I come from the Brendel family. I am also the lord of this humble abode. So it's the lord. I apologize for any offense. Caesar pretended to be surprised and bowed again. According to the customs of your country, I should have visited you as soon as I entered the town. But as you know, the long journey is really a very difficult thing. My attendants and I are really too tired. We can't wait to settle down and rest. I was going to visit you after taking care of everything, but I didn't expect to break the rules and let you visit me first. I'm really sorry. Although he said sorry, Nina looked at him with a completely righteous attitude. There was not a hint of guilt in his eyes, but only the arrogance and condescension of a great noble. Could it be that he really is a descendant of a great noble family? Nina could not guess, so he could only follow the conversation. To be honest, if you don't know the customs of the Northland Alliance, you don't have to apologize at all. But if I may ask, sir, are you really from the faraway Central Free Trade City-state as the rumors say? Absolutely. Caesar nodded without hesitation. Please allow me to confess. This is also to apologize for any inappropriate actions I may have done in the future. I am a citizen of Alanda, and I come from one of the 9 free trade city-states. This is the first time I have come to the Northland Alliance, and I am completely unfamiliar with the way of life here. Until now, I am almost still living the life of the South. As you know, as a new trading city-state in the central region, Elantra is poles apart from the fine traditions of the northern kingdoms. Therefore, if you find anything inappropriate in my words and actions, please forgive me. A good disguise had to be filled in with enough details. For this, Caesar had done his homework and made perfect preparations. When talking about the background, he was not afraid at all. Because this time, not only was this guy seeking revenge, but he was also brewing another plan. Not only did he want to bury the Brendel family, he also wanted to secretly replace all the members of the Roy family with shapeshifters to create a new Brendel family, allowing them to live happily again. Yes, this was Caesar's ambition. He wanted to take control of the Khaki border and turn it into his puppet country without starting a war with the humans. If he succeeded, there was no doubt that it would be of great help to Black Dragon in the future. In the future, there would be an endless stream of resources pouring into Blackwing's Nest. Blackwing's Nest. Luna and the leaders of the other clans came up with a new name for the Green Capital. This name has been approved by the Black Dragon Lord. You said that you came from a trading city-state and entered Rhine Khaki of the Northern Kingdoms, but this barren land is not a place to enjoy. Nina said. At the same time, she raised her head. Contrary to her previous courtesy, she looked directly into the man's eyes rather impolitely. Then, please allow me to ask, why are you here, and what is your purpose? He raised his eyebrows and straightened his face. His gentle demeanor was no longer there, showing the dignity of the Lord of Khaki. He stared at the face of the man in front of him, as if trying to find a flaw in his face. It seems that your so-called enjoyment is not the same as mine. However, Caesar's tone was not unnatural at all. He smiled and said, I consider myself a traveler. To me, enjoying different scenery is a kind of enjoyment. I've drunk wine alone at Elantra Falls, and I've also partied with the dwarves in a foreign town. I've led an army to war in Kaimohan, and I've also walked alone in the elven forest. I've courted the clam girls on the coast, and I've also danced with the fox singers. I've presented a long sword to the head of the Federation of Free Trade, and I've also presented a pearl to Emperor Enrique of the unfallen Empire, Caesar, who had already prepared a draft, said smoothly. After all, we are not long-lived species like the giant dragons. Iradia is so big, why don't you take a look at it? Nina was stunned and looked at Tangerine in surprise. This person was either telling the truth, or he was crazy. However, the structure and knowledge shown in his words were beyond the reach of ordinary people. In addition, the noble's performance in the rumors made Nina more inclined to believe the first possibility. Of course, she could not be completely sure. As she was stunned, Nina's tough tone softened, but she still grasped a key point and continued to ask. The gifts you presented to the two kings are definitely treasures that ordinary people can't imagine. So, did the head of Tashimo and Emperor Enrique give you anything in return? According to the customs of Iradia, if the visitor's status was high enough, and the gifts were valuable enough, the kings were likely to give gifts in return. However, if this guy was talking nonsense, of course. Caesar nodded matter-of-factly. The two kings are supreme in power, so naturally, they would not be stingy. The head of Tashimo gave me another long sword in return, and Emperor Enrique was even more generous. He ordered people to give me 10 treasures for me to choose from. What did you choose? A living life. Caesar's disguise was flawless, but he was wailing in his heart, "Gods, please stop the human's long-winded and glib speech. I really want to stuff the head of the monster into this guy's throat. Damn it, I want to stuff one in my mouth too. I wonder if you have such a valuable treasure with you. Can you show it to me?" Nina wanted to continue asking. This was a good opportunity to find out the truth of what Lucian said. However, before he could say anything, Tangerine had already walked to the side, pulled out a knight's long sword from a beautiful scabbard in the corner of the hall, and raised it with one hand. The name of the sword was Radiant. It was wider than a palm and taller than a man. The blade was made of elemental black steel, which was unique to the Free Trade Federation. Its color was as deep as the sea. There was nothing in the world more suitable for making weapons than elemental black steel. Nina had stood up with Tangerine before, but at this moment, he quietly took a step back. This fellow's eyesight was not bad. He could tell at a glance that this was a magic item that had been blessed by magic. Although it was not legendary, it was still quite high grade and valuable. That's the sword. The noble named Tangerine did not seem to notice the hidden danger at all. He handed the hilt of the sword to Nina without any scruples. "Oh, by the way, look at my memory." After Nina took over the seemingly heavy but extremely light sword and admired it, the noble clapped his hands again and said, "It's noon. Although this humble house has just been built, I have to be a good host. Although the dishes are as usual, I still hope you can come. Little guy, is lunch ready?" Chapter 138. Just as he finished speaking, the inner door was gently pushed open. A forest fairy with a gentle face and skin as white as snow, wearing a black muslin dress, came in quietly. She was barefoot, revealing the elegant lines of her calves and ankles. Her transparent wings, as thin as a cicada's, fluttered gently as she floated in the air. She bowed and said, "Everything is ready, master." At this moment, Nina could not shift his gaze away. Oh gods, that was truly a forest sprite, something that wizards yearned for even in their dreams. Every one of them could attract countless spellcasters to scramble for them, yet this one used them to deal with all sorts of trivial matters. Caesar let Nina Brendel stand there in a daze. At the same time, he tilted his head slightly and looked at the deformed servant who was as silent as a stone statue. He smiled. "Sir." After a pause, he finally said to Nina, "The power of the Emperor of the Unfallen Empire is supreme. This is a gift from Emperor Enrique to me. In my opinion, there is nothing more wonderful than this in the world." "It is my honor to serve you, master." Luna responded very cooperatively. Her voice was gentle and her posture was elegant. However, when Nina turned back to Caesar, she winked at him. "Well, since everything is ready, please follow me to have a meal. I believe you will not refuse." Nina opened his mouth and looked like he wanted to say something, but Caesar did not give him a chance to speak, nor did he want to give him time to think. Countless illusions were intertwined with each other, and would definitely defeat his opponent completely. From the moment Nina stepped into the garden mansion, the Black Dragon's victory was already decided. As he spoke, he pushed open the secondary door, and the fake noble led the real noble into the dining hall. The long table was already filled with delicacies. Nina Brendel felt as if he had entered a magical place. He looked around, trying to calm himself down and regain his senses. The grandeur of the dining hall was no less than that of a prince's palace. The entire room was paved with marble and decorated with exquisite carvings. There were 2 exquisite statues standing at both ends of the entrance, with fruit baskets on their heads. The baskets were stacked with delicious fruits, forming a pyramid shape. For lunch, there was a whole roast lamb with blueberry jam, a large piece of honey roast duck with black pepper sauce, a huge fierce head fish, and a fruit salad. For drinks, there was wine and milk of poppy. The plates were made of silver, and the bowls were made of porcelain from a trading city. Of course, Nina was the Earl's eldest son after all. He wouldn't be surprised by these things. Although the ingredients were expensive and delicious, they were in line with the standard of living of ordinary nobles. It wasn't too outrageous. What was truly unbelievable was that on both sides of the table, there were many young girls with graceful figures kneeling. They had long hair that was like a waterfall and faces that were like elves. Their bodies were beautiful and their eyes were clean. They were all wearing a hazy, transparent veil, and only a hazy, transparent veil. When they saw Caesar leading people in, they all looked over and smiled. In an instant, it was as if flowers had bloomed in spring. Nina clicked his tongue inwardly. This was too. He didn't reveal too much, but the contraction of his pupils and the slight trembling of his body betrayed this noble with good manners. Caesar turned a blind eye to this. He led him to his seat and started eating. Nina felt that this lunch was specially prepared for him. This was because although the host seemed to be eating all the time, he only tasted a few mouthfuls of the delicacies in front of him before stopping. In fact, this was indeed the case. Caesar didn't plan to eat at all. There was a lot of food on the table, but it wasn't enough to fill the gaps between his teeth. This fellow had to wait until there was no one around before he could really start eating. In the end, the girls served the dessert. They were actually the fruit baskets on the statues that Nina had seen just now. The desserts were taken down and placed in front of them. The two of them chatted casually and paused for a while. When the tiredness of the afternoon gradually overwhelmed them, the steward, who had been silent like a stone statue, presented something. It was a small porcelain cup plated with mithril. It was only 1/3 the size of a normal wine cup. There was a lid made of the same material on the cup. The steward's careful manner when he served the small cup made Nina curious. When the lid was opened and he saw the dark purple jam inside, he asked, "What is this?" "Caviar." Earl Tangerine smiled at him. "Oh, perhaps you haven't heard of this before. It's a great product that I brought from the elf forest. It came from the night elves who couldn't be traced. This time, I brought it to the countries in the north. Please have a taste." As he spoke, he got up and walked closer. He scooped a spoonful of the so-called jam into his mouth. He narrowed his eyes and raised his head slightly. After tasting it for a while, he handed it to the noble in front of him. Caviar. Nina thought to himself. This thing wasn't a specialty of the elf forest. The countries in the north also had something like this. To be honest, he almost believed that the person in front of him was a real great noble. But now this person seemed to have exposed himself. Without saying anything, he scooped up a spoonful and put it into his mouth. Since he dared to come and visit, he naturally wasn't afraid that the other party would harm him. As the eldest son of the Earl, Nina naturally had something to protect himself. The eldest son of the Earl chewed lightly and tasted the thing. To be honest, he didn't feel that the taste was very good at first. But soon, the noble experienced the taste of dizziness and fell into a dazed state. This was a feeling that could only occur when smoking high-quality tobacco. But at this moment it appeared when he was tasting the delicious taste. It was so fierce and so fast that it seemed to take away all the troubles in his mind. What was imaginary became real, immersing him in all kinds of illusions and dreams. Caesar looked at him. Of course, this wasn't caviar. It was a kind of plant from the Underdark. It was discovered by the Black Dragon when he tasted hundreds of herbs. After that, the wild boar people experimented and extracted it and made it into something that was similar to an unspeakable thing in his previous life. The things in the Underdark were generally slightly poisonous, and this thing was even more so. However, it didn't have much effect on a true dragon. Because of his body, after Caesar ate it, other than the taste, it didn't have any other functions. But it was completely different for a human. The night elves call it reclaiming worries and giving happiness, Nina said to Nina. I believe that you now have a pair of eagle wings. With them, you can travel around Iradia to your heart's content. Yes. The eldest son of the Earl narrowed his eyes and indulged in it. That's very easy. Then please have fun. If your wings disappear, don't be afraid. Someone will catch you. Caesar clapped his hands. 2 young girls wearing light veils immediately came forward and helped Nina into the room. The tipsy eldest son of the Earl was in a daze and could not help but become out of line and wanton. His hands were already beginning to wander in front of these charming and seductive young girls. Soon, the room was filled with panting sounds of different tones. At this time, Caesar brought the forest fairies out of the dining hall and walked out. It wasn't until they were far away that he revealed a malicious smile. Luna also couldn't hold it in any longer. She bent over and retched. If Nina Brendel saw those ugly, deformed creatures with heads that looked like insects and maggots, and found out that these young girls were actually shapeshifters in disguise, what would she do? Chapter 139. In the evening, when Nina Brendel left the garden mansion, he felt refreshed and at peace. Before he left, Count Tangerine was very generous and wanted to give him the 2 girls who had accompanied him before. He also kindly reminded him that they were mute girls and there was no need to worry. But he was the Count's eldest son after all, and Nina did not lose his head. Considering his own identity and to avoid any uncertainties, he still rejected the Count's kindness. To be honest, after he boarded the luxurious carriage and left the Count's mansion, he felt a little regretful. Northerners lived in the wilderness and under the scorching sun. Whether it was Rhine or the entire northern kingdoms, it was difficult to find such a delicate and graceful girl. Even if he was the eldest son of Count Brendel and the future Lord of Khaki, it was still difficult to find such a delicate and graceful girl. At this moment, he completely believed that the other party was a great noble from the trading city. Whether it was the longsword, brilliant light, the forest fairies, the sumptuous banquet or the elven caviar, they were all things that a spy from the Rhine kingdom would not be able to take out. Especially the elven caviar that left a deep impression in his mind. He was afraid that only those extravagant southern nobles would be able to get their hands on such an unforgettable good thing. On the other hand, from the tone of the man's voice, the way he spoke, and the way he ignored the seductive girl, it was clear that he was in a superior position. Nina felt that her father, Count Brendel, whom she had always respected, was inferior to him in this aspect. If the Rhine kingdom could send out such a spy, then it could only be a supporter of Grand Duke Lionheart. Those counts with fiefdoms had personally come into battle. But thinking about it, even if the Rhine kingdom was defeated, these arrogant and cowardly nobles would not do such a thing. As for the evil dragon, Nina did not consider it at all and had long been completely eliminated. Now that he had basically confirmed the other party's identity, what Nina needed to consider was how to get money from the other party. The Brendel family's current problem could not be delayed, and the sudden appearance of Count Tangerine was his savior. Although he had a good impression of this generous and gentle noble, he had to solve the urgent problem at hand first. But how to solve it? Gather an army to rob them, tie them up as hostages, and then ask for a generous ransom from the trading city? Don't joke around. Even the stupidest and most radical noble wouldn't be able to do such a thing. This tangerine had traveled all over the world and even dealt with outsiders, but nothing had happened for so many years. Moreover, he had met with head of state Timertian and Emperor Enriel. He was definitely a big shot with a deep background. Even in the vast empire where the sun never sets, he would probably be able to eat well. Even if they had taken over the entire Rhine kingdom, his father would not allow him to do such a stupid thing, not to mention that the Brendel family was still at war with Grand Duke Lionheart. Even if they had annexed the entire Rhine to do so, his father would not allow him to do such a stupid thing. The mages. Moreover, the other party was warm and generous to him, gentle and friendly. With Nina's character, he really didn't want to do anything bad to Tangerine. If it were his brother Roy, it would be possible. Since it was impossible to kidnap her by force, what should he do? Directly explain the situation and ask for Tangerine's help? But they had only met once and could not even be considered friends. Even if the other party was so rich that he could buy the entire Lion Kingdom, why would he fork out money for him and help the Brendel family? Nina encountered a new problem. On the other side, Caesar began to eat. Countless amounts of food were placed on the plates and were served by the shapeshifters one after another. There were whole sheep, cows, and large pieces of mammon lizard meat. Some of them didn't even have time to cook before they were sent in. Caesar didn't care about food. His stomach was as strong as a furnace, and he swallowed all the food without chewing. After a while, he finished his meal and wiped his mouth with a napkin. The human body was troublesome. Usually, he only needed to lick it with his tongue. Even his teeth were picked by little Luna. Caesar thought that he had to end this disguise as soon as possible. As a dragon, he was used to being comfortable and casual, but there were many things that humans needed to pay attention to. Now, Caesar was not used to it. What he could not stand the most was the glib tone of the Iradia people. He actually had to imitate their way of speaking and agree with them. Sooner or later, I'll burn you all to death, Black Dragon thought unhappily. At this moment, the servants came in from both sides of the door and cleaned up the food residue and blood stains. The leader of the mutated monsters, who was disguised as a butler, was summoned to Caesar. Together with it were the two girls, who had accompanied Nina previously. How about it? Which one of you is more confident? After cleaning himself up, Caesar held Luna in his arms like he was holding a baby. This made him feel much better. He asked the bugs. I mentioned before that she was one of the targets. The leader of the mutated monsters looked back at the two people kneeling behind it and said in a low voice, "We are all confident, Your Majesty." Imitation was the most innate ability of the mutated monsters. They had fly-like eyes, python-like tongues, and caterpillar-like fur. These countless sensory organs allowed them to collect every piece of information and detail about their target. If they really wanted to disguise themselves, they could even imitate the smell to be exactly the same. Is that so? Caesar said, "Let me see." Then, right before his eyes, the mutated monsters began to change their bodies. The shape-shifting spells worked together with their physical bodies. As their faces contorted and their skin moved, 3 Nina Brendels appeared in front of him. They were exactly the same as the eldest son of the Count that Caesar had seen before. Even the shape and structure of the mole at the corner of their eyes, the freckles on their faces, and the dense distribution of blackheads on the sides of their noses were exactly the same. As long as they did not speak, even Count Brendel and Roy would not be able to recognize them. Yes, they could not speak. Even though the mutated monsters could imitate the appearance flawlessly, they could not match Nina's thoughts, memories, and habits of speech. That was an ability that only the brainworms had. Caesar did not have such a rare descendant. But it did not matter. As long as the appearance was the same, it was enough. Caesar did not need them to obtain Nina's memories and thoughts because he was not afraid of being exposed. If that happened, the entire Brendel family would be destroyed. He wanted to create a brand new Brendel and control Khaki. In reality, they were just a group of monsters in name. Since they were all mutated monsters, which Brendel should be the one to expose all of this? Now that the first step of the plan had been taken, the next step would become a matter of course. As long as he could find a way to find their location and let Nina bring him to Roy and Count Brendel, Caesar would be able to end everything. In close combat, the elderly green dragon was crushed to death in 2 rounds. If I didn't have a legend beside me, there really wouldn't be anything that could stop this black dragon. Not to mention, this dragon could even go berserk, automatic hormone effect. Chapter 140. Due to his family's demands and the psychological closeness, Nina had become quite close to Count Tangerine during this period of time. Finally, when he was invited to visit his residence, Lord Khaki's castle, for the second time, the noble inadvertently revealed that he had a foothold in every country on the continent, and he hoped to have a similar place in the northern countries. He wanted to obtain a fiefdom. This was an opportunity. Nina seized on his words and went with the flow. He frankly told him that the Brendel family was in a long and drawn-out war with the tyrannical Duke Lionheart. Even though they were gradually winning, they were unable to chase the Lion army out of the Khakis' territory due to the lack of supplies. He took out a map and showed it to Tangerine. The Khakis' territory occupied half of the entire Lion kingdom. Everyone knew that there was something fishy going on, but he insisted that the Brendel family was only defending one side. Nina said that if Count Tangerine was willing to provide assistance, the Brendel family would definitely not forget their friendship. If they won the war in the future, Count Tangerine could draw any territory on the map, and Count Tangerine would definitely agree to it. However, oh? So you're not the Lord of Khaki, and your father has the authority to decide? Tangerine seemed to have focused on the wrong thing. His undisguised frivolous words pierced Nina's heart deeply. The Count's eldest son was annoyed. He did not expect Brendel to say such words. It was difficult to believe that such words came from the mouth of a noble who was born in a noble family. But even though the words were crude, the truth was there, and he could not refute it. It must be those despicable and vulgar races. After interacting with them for a long time, even the most noble and elegant humans would become unbearably crude. Nina cursed in his heart, but at the same time, he smiled and said, "You're right. My father is strong and quick-witted, but I'm a beginner and ignorant. There are still many things that I need to learn, and naturally I'm unable to take over the Khakis' affairs." There were thorns in his words. These words were actually meant to mock Tangerine for his ignorance of the etiquette of the nobles of the northern lands. His words were sharp. However, Nina regretted it as soon as the words left his mouth. In terms of status, he was inferior to the other party to begin with. Moreover, now that he had a favor to ask of the other party, how could he speak ill of him? "Be rational, Nina," he said to himself. "You are no longer a condescending aristocrat, but a sincere person asking for help." The Earl's eldest son was more knowledgeable than Roy. He knew that his words might offend the Earl, but he urgently needed the Earl's help. So Nina waited for the Earl's reprimand. If possible, he was willing to apologize loudly like a nun. For Brendel, Nina comforted himself. If he could get the help of this noble, even if the other party punished him by making him chew on black bread that was like sawdust or drink the soup of flies and maggots, he would gladly accept it and ask for another bowl. Fortunately, Count Tangerine didn't seem to notice the subtext in his words. He didn't answer him. Instead, he took 2 steps forward and looked at a mural hanging in the main hall of the Lord's castle. There were 3 men dressed in typical northern noble clothing. 2 of them were young, one on the left and the other on the right. They were hugging a middle-aged noble with gray hair who was full of vigor. He recognized the two young men as Nina and Roy. The middle-aged man in the mural was undoubtedly Count Brendel himself. This was the first time Caesar had seen the supporter behind Roy. They stared at each other across space and time. The other party was an iconic Northland noble full of power. He had thick eyebrows and a pitch-black beard. His white hair, which was cut into a military style, exuded a strong heroic aura. He did not look like a noble, but more like a general. However, Brendel's face looked ordinary, but his thick eyebrows were filled with a hint of gloom that could not be dispelled. It was vividly copied by the artist, and it made Caesar feel a little uncomfortable. Seeing Nina walk up with a solemn expression, Caesar asked knowingly, "This is the real Lord Kaki?" "Yes, my lord." Nina smiled and introduced, "This is my father, Count Brendel." He guarded the borders for the Rhine family for his entire life, and never left his fief. However, Duke Lionheart spread rumors for the sake of ambition and greed, and started a war regardless of right or wrong. He wanted to take back the fief that the Brendel family had for thousands of years. In order to survive, we had no choice but to resist. "I believe in your words, my lord." Caesar nodded solemnly. The mockery and sarcasm in his words was something that only the gods could understand. "Please believe that I sincerely want to lend a helping hand to a friend in danger, but I hope to visit Count Brendel and have a chat with him. You must know that it's not that I don't trust you, but only when I see Lord Brendel can I understand the situation and provide assistance to the Brendel family. Isn't that right?" Nina did not immediately agree to Tangerine's request. The suggestion seemed simple and reasonable, but it was not the case at all. The Brendel family was at war with Duke Lionheart, and as the commander of the Kaki family, Count Brendel and Roy had to be careful of countless plots and traps, and guard against all possible assassinations and sneak attacks. Their whereabouts could not be easily exposed. Back then, the Green Dragon's assassination of the Northern Alliance's commander was a good example. Even now, no one knew that the Brendel family was the mastermind behind it. Naturally, they had a deeper impression of it than others and were extremely vigilant against it. In the current situation, Nina was the one who was pushed to the front. Everything that needed to be handled by the Brendel family would be handled by him, while Count Brendel and Roy were completely hidden behind the scenes. As you know, the front lines are currently at war. Count Brendel is leading the army to resist the Rhine family's attack. The battlefield is extremely dangerous, and I cannot let the Brendel family's friends be in danger. Nina bowed. "For your safety, please forgive me for not being able to facilitate this meeting." "Is that so?" Count Tangerine sighed and ended the topic. "I have to say, this is really a pity." He saw Nina's eagerness and vigilance. At this time, there was no need to push too hard. Going too far was as bad as not going far enough, and if he was too eager, he might give himself away. Caesar had made sufficient preparations in advance and understood the Brendel family's current situation. Now that Duke Lionheart had turned from offense to defense, if this dragged on, when the Northern Alliance's reinforcements arrived, the Brendel family would be destroyed without him doing anything. That was why they urgently needed external help to eliminate the Rhine family as soon as possible, swallow the entire duchy, and stabilize the situation before negotiating with the other countries. Unfortunately, the Green Dragon was already dead. The Green Dragon Kingdom had turned into Blackwing's nest, and this leg was completely gone. Without reinforcements, the Brendel family would not be able to continue the war. And at this time, Count Tangerine's sudden appearance would be the last straw. Although the overwhelming pressure would not make them lose their minds, it would make them willing to take the risk. Caesar only needed to start the conversation, and in a few days, Nina would probably take the initiative to come to his door and bring him to meet with Count Brendel. After preparing for so long, Caesar could still afford to wait. Chapter 141. You're saying that he wants to personally come to the battlefield and visit me? After sending Tangerine off, Nina immediately returned to the Lord's mansion. She arrived at the study and crushed a communication crystal. After it resonated, she began to talk to Count Brendel. Yes, father. Nina nodded. I can see that he doesn't trust me and wants to talk to you face to face. It seems that he intends to sign an alliance with Lord Kaki. The nobles of the trading city-state. It seems that those fellows have dealt too much with the merchant. They seem to think that only things written on paper have binding effect. Count Brendel laughed coldly, then turned to Roy beside him. What do you think? Unless we send people to the free trade city-states and the unfallen empire to verify that this person really exists and that his name and whereabouts are exactly the same, then we can trust him. Roy's face was expressionless. He said that he had met with head of state Timushan and emperor in Rither. This is not a small matter and should be known by everyone. It won't be difficult to find some evidence. Nina had been in contact with them, so Roy and Count Brendel knew all the details of Count Tangerine's actions. But we have no friends in the south. Besides, even the teleportation spell of a great mage can't cross such a long distance. We would have to spend a lot of money to create a physical portal. Nina explained. We don't have the energy or time. Also, with that guy's actions, it's impossible for him to be a spy and assassin from the Lion Kingdom. My eyes can't be wrong, the Lion Kingdom can't hire such an orthodox noble. Although he and his brother were not close, they were not at odds with each other. They were still harmonious and discussed problems more objectively. I know it can't be the Lion Kingdom. What I'm worried about is the Black Dragon. Roy lowered his head and fiddled with his gloves. He said softly, There's been no news from the Green Capital for so long. The contract with the Mother of Poison has long disappeared. The old green dragon of more than 400 years old is now either imprisoned or dead. No matter what, the Black Dragon has really returned and won the battle against the Green Dragon. Roy said and turned to Count Brendel. Father, you said that smart people are always interested in benefits, and I agree with this point. But that Black Dragon, it's different. 7 years ago, I once allowed all my soldiers to fight to the death, causing the Mother of Poisons to come to the battlefield and personally take action. But in that battle there was a scene that I remember very clearly. When the Black Dragon realized that its attacks were ineffective and that it couldn't even hurt me, it didn't abandon its kin and escape. Instead, it chose to stand with the orcs and gnolls. Roy furrowed his brows as he tried to recall the incident. What's even more puzzling is that it was standing in front of the orcs and gnolls. This means that if that old dog hadn't stood up in the end, once the Green Capital army charged, the Black Dragon would have been the first to be surrounded and in danger. After that, the more I thought about it, the more I felt that something was wrong. This kind of action is something that all the Penachet dragons and even most of the human nobles wouldn't be able to do. This is enough to prove that it's one of a kind. Father, you said that under normal circumstances, a smart Black Dragon would never rashly attack and would choose to let us fight amongst ourselves. That's right, but I think that the Black Dragon doesn't belong to the category of normal circumstances. After dealing with the Green Capital, it's very likely that it would directly retaliate against us. What if this Tangerine is the Black Dragon using a transformation spell to disguise himself and sneak into the northern kingdoms? If that's the case, then Count Tangerine's wealth is comparable to a country's, and the wealth of the Green Capital is enough to support his extravagance. Roy concluded, I don't trust him, and at this time we have to be vigilant. But the dragons are all greedy. Nina was anxious. They can't. My foolish brother, nothing is impossible in the Iradia. Roy looked into his brother's eyes and said word by word, You haven't seen it, so you don't know how terrifying it is. But I have. 7 years later, it defeated the Mother of Poison, proving that its power has grown to an unimaginable level. Roy did not hide his vigilance, and it could even be said that he was afraid. If it's really the black dragon in disguise, we'll die as soon as we see it. I don't want to gamble with my life. The ancient god that her father worshipped had given the Brendel family many mysterious abilities, but it had never responded to them, nor did it give them any real power. If it was really the black dragon, they would not be able to survive if their hiding place was found. After receiving Roy's strong objection, Nina had no choice but to look at her father and wait for the Count's decision. Well said. Brendel looked at Roy with a smile and praised. It seems that this war has made you grow a lot, and you'll be able to hold your own in the future. But he calmed down and knocked on the table lightly. But you have to consider the current needs of the Brendel family. We're embarrassingly short on funds and urgently need a large sum of money, otherwise we won't be able to outlast Duke Lionheart. Remember, don't give up on this rare opportunity just because of a possible guest. With that, Count Brendel nodded to his eldest son. Nina, tell Count Tangerine that I agree to meet him. Father. Roy's eyes widened in disbelief, and his voice could not help but raise by 2 octaves. Before this, he had already explained the cause and effect clearly, and he had also laid out the interests clearly. He did not expect his father to make such a decision in the end. Brendel did not turn around when he heard his second son's whisper, and only waved his hand in his direction to stop Roy. He continued to speak to Nina. But tell him that in consideration of the need to maintain secrecy during the war, we will only allow him to come alone under your escort. Make this prerequisite clear, and then ask the Count of Tangerine if he agrees. Then tell me his choice. That was the end of Brendel's instructions. Nina was still a little confused, but Roy immediately understood and said, "Let's do it this way." A true noble of high status would never agree to such a harsh and unreasonable request. Regardless of whether he had the protection of a magical item, he would never hand over his freedom to others. Moreover, under normal circumstances, nobles would feel that they were being looked down upon, and in order to maintain their dignity and status, they would reject such a request. But if the so-called Count Tangerine's real identity was the Black Dragon who had snuck into the northern kingdoms to seek revenge, he would probably agree immediately and give himself away. Whether it was real or fake, it would be clear after a try. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.